The world holds places where maps end and ordinary exploration falters, spaces marked by silence, decay, and secrets too unsettling to be recorded. Across forests, mountains, and abandoned complexes, corridors stretch into darkness, and ruins whisper of events no official report can fully explain. Some of these locations were once vibrant with purpose, yet now remain untouched by time, their histories frozen, waiting for those daring enough to step beyond boundaries few ever cross. Through this journey, you will trace the steps of expeditions that ventured into these forbidden sites, from crumbling Arctic research facilities to hidden underground temples, deserted air bases, and forests steeped in unexplained phenomena. You will encounter moments where reality blurred with mystery, where echoes of the past collided with the present, and where the unexpected left even seasoned explorers questioning what is possible within the shadows of the world's most enigmatic places. The Vanishing Trail of Devil's Throat Cavern. The narrow trail that led into the Rhodope Mountains cut through shadowed pines and the chill of early spring, drawing the expedition toward Devil's Throat Cavern, a limestone sinkhole known locally as Diavolsko Garlo. This cave system in southern Bulgaria had been partially mapped since the mid-20th century, its surveyed passages reaching remarkable depths and intricate galleries that fascinated speleologists and geologists alike. The team assembled that morning was composed of experienced explorers from across Europe, each with years of experience navigating complex karst systems. Their objective was both ambitious and perilous: chart the unmapped sections beyond the last officially documented chamber while collecting geological and hydrological data that could expand understanding of the massif's hidden interior. Local villagers long whispered about the cavern's forbidding presence, believing it to be a place where the mountain exhaled strange winds and where distant echoing voices travelled along the forest slopes at night. Folklore described livestock avoiding the entrance and shepherds disturbed by subterranean roars that sounded like thunder trapped beneath stone. These stories, while anecdotal, seeped into the expedition's collective consciousness and added tension to what should have been a routine descent. Scientific literature acknowledged Devil's Throat as an important karst feature, rich in underground rivers and limestone formations, yet it remained silent on the mountain's eerie reputation, leaving the explorers to face both the physical and psychological unknowns of their journey. The first leg of the descent followed established protocols, with ropes anchored into stable limestone and carbide lamps illuminating the darkness beyond the cave mouth. The air grew cooler with every metre, heavy with the scent of damp rock and the mineral tang carried by the underground river below. Team members communicated in restrained tones, careful not to disrupt concentration or consume unnecessary oxygen. Stalactites and stalagmites rose and fell in sweeping formations as the passage narrowed, then widened again, revealing evidence of water flows that had carved these depths over millions of years, a testament to the geological patience of nature and the enduring silence of the subterranean world. At approximately 450 metres beneath the surface, the expedition reached the limit of the last surveyed map, where earlier explorers had turned back due to unstable rock and confusing passageways. There, a choke of boulders blocked a promising gallery whose echo hinted at unseen chambers beyond. Lead caver Emil Novak, a seasoned speleologist from Zagreb, coordinated careful removal of the debris, widening the opening just enough for initial probes. The chamber beyond appeared immense, its scale inferred only by acoustic patterns and readings from portable sonar equipment. Preliminary measurements suggested a cavernous expanse far larger than anything previously documented in the Rhodope karst, hinting at underground rivers and hidden tributaries flowing in directions yet unknown to science. In their initial radio transmission from within this newly accessed chamber, the team described unexpected geological formations, striated limestone bands and crystalline deposits that refracted lamplight in haunting patterns, casting shadows on walls smooth from millennia of water flow. The roar of an underground river intensified, feeding channels that preliminary scans suggested wound deeper into the massif. Excitement mixed with cautious awe as explorers relayed their findings, noting the vastness ahead and the potential for discovering entirely new underground systems. Each measurement and observation reinforced the sense that they had entered a hidden world, ancient and untouched, where time seemed to fold within the cold, dripping stone. Then the transmission stopped. After the last burst of excited chatter, repeated calls through secured radio frequencies returned only static, and no further communication came from within the cavern. The forest above dropped into an unnatural quiet as daylight waned and the base team waited, following established protocol before initiating a recovery. Even seasoned expedition coordinators felt a creeping unease, a sense that the mountain had claimed its silence. Lanterns illuminated the trailhead, casting long shadows across the pine forest while a wind whispered along the slopes, carrying with it the faint sound of water moving somewhere far beneath the earth, out of human reach. When the recovery team descended the following morning, the known passages were undisturbed, ropes and equipment left exactly as the missing explorers had secured them. At the choke point where the team had entered the newly accessed chamber, no footprints, packs or signs of human passage were found. Thermal scanners detected no consistent heat signatures, while instruments designed to capture motion reported only irregular, erratic readings. The only constant was the underground river, rushing past unseen, carrying with it a steady hollow echo that filled the chamber. Every observation deepened the mystery, leaving investigators unable to explain how a fully prepared team could vanish without a trace. Fibre optic scopes were fed into narrow fissures that led from the chamber, revealing only rock walls and glimpses of moving water. Small drones equipped with lights navigated the passages where physical access was impossible, yet interference from humidity, mineral content, and turbulent flows made orientation nearly impossible. Geological studies later confirmed that karst systems like Devil's Throat can produce confusing air currents, optical illusions, and acoustic distortions, yet these factors alone could not account for the absence of all physical evidence. The team's disappearance remained an enigma, documented and verified up to the point where human presence simply ceased. Local villagers reported strange sounds in the nights following the disappearance, describing low, resonant echoes drifting from the cavern, as though the mountain itself groaned in lament. While anecdotal, these reports spread quickly, gaining the attention of journalists and amateur explorers alike. Speleologists familiar with karst systems acknowledged that underground rivers can produce low-frequency noises, but the rhythmic, almost deliberate patterns described by witnesses were unusual. Scientists remained cautious, emphasizing that perception often interprets ambiguity as intent, yet even skeptics could not deny the unsettling nature of these accounts, which seemed to blur the boundary between natural phenomenon and something inexplicably sentient. Months of investigation produced no definitive answers. Geological surveys found no recent seismic disturbances, and rock stability remained intact throughout the known passages. Equipment designed to detect subsurface movement confirmed only the river's flow and sporadic acoustic reverberations, none of which clarified the fate of the missing team. The Bulgarian Speleological Federation suspended any further expeditions into unmapped sections, citing safety concerns and the unresolved circumstances surrounding the disappearance. Academic journals referenced the 2015 expedition with restraint, acknowledging the lack of evidence while documenting the known geological features and mapped routes. Despite the official suspension, Devil's Throat continued to attract the attention of adventurous speleologists and researchers drawn to forbidden or unexplored areas. The mountain seemed indifferent to human ambition, its mapped passages unchanged yet hinting at the vast unknown beyond. Above ground, the trailhead slowly reclaimed by moss and leaf litter reminded visitors that nature outlasts exploration, while hikers occasionally reported sudden chills or fleeting echoes that seemed to emanate from the deep cavern below. The cave had become a symbol of both geological wonder and mysterious peril, its depths retaining the silence of those who had vanished within. Even years later, scholars debated what could account for the team's disappearance. The cavern's mapped passages were stable, documented, and devoid of obvious hazards, yet no trace of human presence was recovered. Hydrological anomalies, acoustic distortions, and visual illusions could explain some aspects of the experience, but they could not account for a total absence of material evidence. Devil's Throat remained officially mapped only to the 2015 limit, and while controlled expeditions occasionally returned, none ventured past the choke point where the explorers had vanished. The mountain waited in patient indifference, guarding its deepest secrets beneath stone and water. And sometimes, when the wind shifts through the forest above and the underground river rumbles far below, a voice seems to echo from the cavern, faint but unmistakable, calling to those who would dare enter its forbidden depths. The abandoned observation post of Kyshtym. A brittle wind swept across the cracked tarmac as the expedition approached the fenced perimeter of Kyshtym's long-forgotten observation post, the skeletal remains of Cold War ambition stretching across the snow-dusted plains. The team moved cautiously, aware that every step into this restricted area violated decades of official prohibition. Signs warning of radiation, faded by years of sun and ice, bore witness to the facility's history of secrecy and danger. Their goal was both scientific and forbidden, to explore a site still regulated by Russian authorities, where contamination and dereliction intersected, and where the previous human presence had abruptly vanished, leaving an unsettling emptiness behind. Decades earlier, the 1957 Kyshtym disaster had turned this region into a forbidden zone, leaving behind the Eastern Ural radioactive trace, a scar of contamination that still dictated which areas humans could traverse. Soviet authorities had contained the disaster in secrecy, evacuating entire communities and suppressing knowledge of the accident for years. Scientific reports confirmed the persistence of radioactive isotopes across the affected terrain, with pockets of elevated strontium and cesium remaining for decades. The exclusion zone was real and enforced, but whispers among researchers suggested that beyond official maps lay abandoned infrastructure where historical observation posts still held equipment and data long untouched, waiting for any intruding presence. Rusting gates groaned on their hinges as the team stepped into the compound, where abandoned laboratories and shattered windows hinted at decades of neglect and the silent presence of hazard. Broken signage in Cyrillic warned of high radiation, and long-dead machinery jutted from the frost-covered ground. The explorers noted the faint odour of oxidizing metal and dust, a reminder that even in desolation, the remnants of human activity endured. As they moved across cracked hallways and through collapsed corridors, their boots echoed in spaces once filled with voices and purposeful activity, now haunted by absence. The site was a museum of secrecy and decay, yet it retained an almost sentient vigilance. Geiger counters began to click intermittently as the explorers advanced, each spike and drop of radiation inexplicably precise, creating an unsettling rhythm that no one could fully account for. Sensors flickered, registering radiation where none should have existed, and yet failed to detect expected contamination in known hot zones. The team's geologists and physicists debated possible causes, residual isotopes shifting underground, instrument calibration errors, or localized environmental anomalies. Despite rational explanations, the persistence and pattern of the readings suggested something beyond simple mechanics. Every spike and silence deepened the sense that the post was alive in its own subtle way, observing the intruders who dared step across its frozen threshold. A sealed archive room revealed dust-laden logbooks and weathered notebooks, Soviet-era ink fading on pages filled with data, warnings, and observations that suggested meticulous work abruptly abandoned. Each volume detailed hours of monitoring, temperature fluctuations, and radiation measurements, sometimes noting unexplained deviations that were dismissed as equipment error. Diagrams of reactor cores, sensor arrays, and remote monitoring stations hinted at a broader network of observation, much of it classified and now decayed. The team handled the materials cautiously, aware that radioactive dust could cling to surfaces long after abandonment, yet there was something unnerving in the meticulous unfinished recordings, a narrative abruptly frozen mid-sentence, as if whoever documented them had been forced to leave suddenly. Old audio reels dragged from storage crackled with static and fragments of overlapping voices, as though the long-gone scientists had left behind a conversation frozen in time, half audible and half erased. Announcements from decades past intermingled with alarm signals and indecipherable codes, creating a dissonant symphony of bureaucratic urgency. The team attempted playback on portable devices, only to find the magnetic tape degraded in ways that distorted reality, layering sound upon sound until human speech became unrecognizable. These recordings, factual and verifiable, created a psychological weight, emphasizing the human presence that had vanished. Every word, even partially preserved, evoked the abrupt halt of life and work within these corridors. Outside the post, the terrain was equally strange. Twisted metal fences bent by unknown forces, patches of scorched earth, and a faint vibrational hum that seemed to ripple from the ground itself. The surrounding exclusion zone bore subtle marks of radiation's long-term impact. Vegetation stunted or mutated in isolated patches, trees with bark scarred or peeling unevenly. Occasionally, the team felt minor tremors or shifts in the earth beneath them, likely caused by underground streams or settling soil, yet the rhythmic quality of the vibrations suggested something irregular. Each step beyond the perimeter heightened the sense that this landscape had been sculpted by both human ambition and natural consequence, a silent testament to the disaster it had once concealed. One notebook, discovered beneath a fallen desk, contained meticulously charted radiation readings that abruptly stopped mid-page, leaving the observer's final intentions obscured by decades of decay. Notations described instruments detecting fluctuating levels at intervals the author could not explain, and included sketches of monitoring stations with annotations suggesting caution. The handwriting ended suddenly, leaving a final illegible mark, as though the author had left the room in haste. Even in isolation, the presence of human curiosity and fear lingered within the pages, a ghostly narrative frozen in time. The team examined it closely, aware that such abandoned documentation could provide clues, but also deepen the mystery. Attempts to contact the outside world failed when satellite signals warped and radio frequencies flickered, cutting off communication in ways that made even seasoned engineers uneasy. Calls to the nearest monitoring station went unanswered, and GPS devices occasionally indicated positions outside the mapped exclusion area. The team relied on backup instruments, yet even those produced conflicting readings as they moved between structures. The combination of electronic interference, physical decay, and environmental radiation created a sense of dislocation, where the familiar rules of navigation and measurement seemed unreliable. Isolation was absolute, both physically and technologically, reinforcing the post's dominance over intruding presence. In the main control room, instruments began to behave in contradictory ways, thermometers and radiation meters fluctuating wildly, readings impossible to reconcile with the environment the explorers knew to be stable. Computer monitors, still partially functional, displayed corrupted logs and repeating alerts with no discernible pattern. Attempts to replicate measurements produced inconsistent results, making it impossible to form a coherent understanding of the space. This behavior, grounded in real-world interference from residual radiation and electromagnetic anomalies, nonetheless felt uncanny. The explorers recorded each reading meticulously, aware that any error could compromise their data, yet unable to dismiss the increasingly inexplicable results that surrounded them on all sides. The team retraced their steps through shadowed hallways and collapsed corridors, recording anomalies and trying to reconcile their observations, yet each measurement seemed only to deepen the sense of incomprehensible disturbance. Dust swirled in beams of flashlight as they passed through rooms where machinery still stood, rusted and silent. Every creak of metal, every flicker of instrument light emphasized the lingering presence of both history and hazard. Even mundane observations, a cracked floor tile, a half-empty chemical vial, felt infused with significance. As the post's labyrinthine interior revealed more signs of past human activity abruptly abandoned, the explorers were confronted with a tension between scientific curiosity and a profound unease that grew heavier with each passing minute. Beyond the post's perimeter, the wind carried an almost deliberate echo of metal bending and distant thuds, a reminder that this place had long been abandoned, yet remained stubbornly alive in its own inscrutable way. Shadows cast by derelict towers and fallen fencing stretched unnaturally across the snow, emphasizing the isolation and forbidding nature of the compound. Even as the team left the buildings behind, every glance over the shoulder suggested movement where none should exist. The boundary between reality and perception felt fragile, and the explorers were acutely aware that they had entered a place governed as much by history as by physics, leaving them to wonder which forces truly held sway in the quiet expanse. At the moment they finally withdrew from the compound, a solitary Geiger counter continued to pulse in uneven, deliberate beats, as if signalling secrets that no living person could ever fully understand. The forgotten catacombs beneath Paris. A faint draught carried the scent of damp stone and decay as the expedition descended through a narrow access shaft into the forbidden tunnels beneath Paris, the labyrinth of the catacombs stretching endlessly into darkness, awaiting exploration. The team moved with caution, aware that unauthorized access was illegal and potentially dangerous. Shadows shifted across uneven walls as torches cast flickering light on worn stone. The air was heavy and cool, with the faint metallic tang of centuries-old bone. Even the most experienced explorers felt a growing tension, as if the history embedded in the walls itself watched their every movement. The ossuaries beneath the city, constructed in the late 18th century to relieve overflowing cemeteries, formed a complex network of tunnels and chambers, their walls lined with carefully arranged human remains, creating a somber yet meticulously ordered underground world. Historians documented the transfer of millions of skeletal remains from Parisian cemeteries to these subterranean galleries. Each chamber reflected careful planning, bones stacked by type, skulls oriented uniformly, creating both a macabre pattern and a quiet memorial to the dead. For the expedition team, this historical context underscored both the site's cultural importance and the unnerving atmosphere of exploring spaces meant to remain inaccessible. Torchlight revealed arched ceilings and narrow passageways etched with centuries of inscriptions and graffiti, remnants of previous explorers who had skirted the boundaries of legality and human curiosity to leave their marks on the subterranean maze. Dates, initials, and sketches layered atop one another illustrated a history of clandestine visits, some perhaps stretching back decades. Footprints in dust and scuff marks on stone indicated recent passage, suggesting that the labyrinth's network was still occasionally navigated, despite strict prohibitions. The combination of human history, artistic expression, and practical curiosity contributed to a layered sense of tension as the team realized they were following a chain of visitors whose identities might never be fully known. Maps and sketches carried by the team offered partial guidance, yet discrepancies between historical plans and modern exploration revealed how much of the catacombs remained unmapped, inaccessible, or forgotten beneath layers of soil, stone, and time. Corridors twisted unexpectedly, connecting tunnels in ways that defied expectations. Some passages ended abruptly at collapsed walls, while others descended into darkness where no records existed. Navigation became a delicate balance between trust in historical documents and attention to immediate observation. The explorers relied on measuring tools and careful mapping, but the labyrinth seemed to resist predictability, a human-made structure that had evolved into a place both orderly and deceptive. Footsteps echoed in an unsettling rhythm, bouncing off stone walls and amplifying the slightest sounds, while the labyrinth's irregular acoustics created faint whispers that seemed to originate from unseen corners, challenging the explorer's sense of space. Conversations between team members became muted, replaced by cautious gestures and the occasional click of recording equipment. Even routine noises, the scraping of boots on stone, the adjustment of packs, felt amplified and distorted. The effect was disorienting, producing a sense of motion where there was none and rendering familiar routes suddenly alien. Each echo reminded the team that they were navigating a layered space where perception could betray reality. At a fork in the tunnel, the group discovered chambers partially collapsed or blocked by rubble, with small niches carved into walls that once held religious artifacts, torches, or memorials, leaving behind the faint impression of human presence across centuries. Dust coated the floor, disturbed by the team's careful steps, and faint markings on stone suggested previous explorers had attempted to mark safe passage. These niches, once practical and symbolic, now contributed to a sense of history pressing in from every side. The labyrinth was alive with memory, and the team moved with the awareness that even a minor misstep could lead to injury or becoming lost in unmapped corridors. The walls were lined with skeletal remains stacked in intricate patterns, each femur, skull, and tibia catalogued and arranged according to historical burial practices, providing both a chilling aesthetic and a somber reflection on mortality. The explorers paused to study sections where bones were artistically arranged, creating geometric designs that spoke to both practicality and ritual. Light flickered across bone and stone, casting shadows that shifted like living figures in the torchlight. Awareness of human mortality mingled with the thrill of exploration, and the team felt the weight of history as much as the literal weight of stone and bone pressing around them in the subterranean galleries. Air currents shifted unexpectedly in narrow corridors, carrying both cold drafts and the faint odour of earth and decay, while occasional water seeped from crevices, creating puddles that reflected torchlight in distorted patterns across uneven floors. The explorers noted the sudden temperature drops, drafts funneled through hidden channels, and small, unexplained rustling noises. These environmental shifts affected both instruments and nerves, producing a constant tension that built as they ventured deeper. Even minor irregularities, a damp patch, a sudden drop in sound, a flash of reflection, became cues that the catacombs were not just a static space but an active, responsive environment shaped by centuries of human and natural forces. As the team attempted to navigate deeper passages, they relied on laser distance meters and compasses, yet irregular stone formations and intersecting tunnels distorted their sense of direction, making the labyrinth feel simultaneously vast and inescapable. Long corridors turned unexpectedly, intersecting at angles that did not appear on any historical plans. The explorers experienced a disquieting blend of familiarity and confusion, where a corridor they had passed moments before seemed to repeat itself in subtle variations. Psychological stress mounted, and even the most experienced members relied on meticulous note-taking to avoid becoming disoriented. Each mapped step revealed both the labyrinth's complexity and its capacity to conceal. In a secluded chamber, instruments began to behave erratically, recording minor magnetic disturbances and temperature anomalies that contradicted the known environment, hinting at subtle phenomena that could not be immediately explained by the explorers. Thermometers and compasses registered values that fluctuated without pattern, and digital cameras occasionally froze or displayed distorted imagery. Though grounded in verifiable environmental factors, humidity, air pressure, and metal content, the combination of effects created a perception of unreality. The anomaly lasted only minutes, yet it left an impression of the catacombs as a space where the laws of expectation, even in human-engineered structures, could be temporarily suspended. A sudden misalignment of passageways caused disorientation, as familiar corridors appeared twisted or inverted, forcing the team to retrace steps while shadows played tricks on perception, heightening the sense that the catacombs themselves resisted human intrusion. Walls seemed closer or farther than measurements suggested, and torchlight cast angles that created illusory connections between tunnels. Team members began to move more cautiously, relying on tactile contact with walls and careful tracking of previous steps. The labyrinth's architecture, intended to contain and direct movement, now contributed to a psychological puzzle, turning exploration into a careful negotiation with both space and history. Emerging from the narrow tunnels toward a surface shaft, the explorers took one last glance at the skeletal halls and arched corridors, aware that countless other chambers remained hidden, their secrets untouched and preserved by centuries of careful obscurity. The damp stone echoed behind them, and inscriptions on walls caught in fading torchlight seemed to tell untold stories of those who'd come before. Maps, sketches, and measurements taken during the expedition would provide only a partial record. Even with careful documentation, the labyrinth retained mysteries that no outsider could fully resolve, preserving the tension between human curiosity and the subterranean world's enduring silence. As they climbed into the dim Parisian evening, the labyrinth beneath seemed to exhale behind them, leaving a lingering impression that its forgotten passages still watched, waiting for the next intruders who dared disturb its quiet order. The silent watchtower of Snake Island. Waves slammed against the jagged cliffs as the expedition's boat approached Snake Island, a tiny speck of land in the Black Sea, its forbidding silhouette dominated by a rusting watchtower that had long been off-limits to outsiders. The sea churned violently, making the approach slow and perilous, while cold spray stung the explorers' faces. Every motion of the boat seemed amplified by the relentless wind, emphasizing the island's isolation. From the water, the watchtower loomed like a sentinel, its concrete walls pitted and discoloured. Even before landing, the team felt a tension that suggested the island had been waiting, silent and watchful. Throughout history, the island had served as a strategic maritime outpost, its watchtower once critical for monitoring naval movements and now a relic of military oversight, surrounded by warnings that kept most visitors at bay. Maps and historical records confirmed its restricted status, and reports noted that unauthorized access could result in fines or detention. The island's small size belied its importance, perched at the edge of shipping lanes. The explorers studied aerial images before their approach, aware that every footstep on this forbidding rock carried both historical weight and legal risk. History and danger intertwined on every cliff and ledge. Salt-crusted stone and weathered concrete marked the tower's exterior, its surfaces pitted by decades of wind, rain and sea spray, suggesting both resilience and slow decay under relentless natural forces. Rust streaked from iron reinforcements, and jagged edges of eroded concrete created shadows that shifted with the sun. Tiny barnacles clung stubbornly to lower walls, where waves reached during high tide. Despite decay, the structure stood resolute, a testament to engineering and the sea's enduring assault. The explorers circled the base, noting cracks and corrosion that would have been insignificant elsewhere, but here suggested both danger and the uncanny persistence of human construction against nature. A dense mist clung to the cliffs, muting sounds and distorting distances, while gusts of wind made navigation along narrow rocky paths precarious, emphasizing the island's isolation and the danger of every step. The explorers relied on handholds and ropes, where the terrain grew sharp and slippery, their boots slipping on water-slick stone. Visibility dropped as fog thickened, the tower looming ahead as a shadowy monolith. Every sound, wave crash, distant gull or rock shift felt amplified, creating an eerie rhythm. Isolation settled over the team as they moved forward, a psychological pressure compounded by the sense that the island itself could erase missteps with ease. Rusted metal ladders and broken railings hinted at previous maintenance long abandoned, while faded warning signs reminded the explorers that human presence here was limited and heavily regulated. Each step along the narrow walkways required careful attention. The stairs groaned under weight, and corroded railings offered little reassurance. Weathered signs in multiple languages cautioned against climbing, yet footprints suggested others had defied restrictions before. The explorers documented each marking, understanding that any mistake could prove both dangerous and permanent. In this environment, remnants of human activity were both guideposts and warnings, emphasizing that while the tower endured, it demanded respect and caution from all who approached. Scattered debris and footprints suggested occasional visitors had skirted restrictions, leaving behind discarded equipment, chalk markings, and graffiti that chronicled fleeting incursions into the tower's shadowed spaces. Tiny glass fragments glimmered in torchlight, and faded paint indicated long past surveys or experiments. Sketches of nearby shipping lanes and tide measurements were scrawled on walls, evidence of careful observation and perhaps mischief. Even in abandonment, the tower and surrounding rocks bore the traces of human intent, whether military, scientific or curious. Each artifact reminded the explorers that they were stepping into a continuum of unauthorized exploration, joining the ranks of those who had dared to breach the island's silent authority. Inside, narrow staircases spiraled upward around a central shaft, leading to observation posts where the team could glimpse both the jagged coast and the endless expanse of sea, a view simultaneously majestic and oppressive. The ascent was slow, each step echoing in the hollow shaft. Light filtered in from small windows, casting geometric patterns across walls pocked by rust and erosion. The air smelled faintly of salt and metal, carrying the cold bite of the sea. From each platform, the team could observe the island's treacherous shoreline and the distant horizon, aware that exposure to wind and waves below could be as deadly as any fall. Height and isolation combined into a tangible tension. Airborne salt and mist interfered with electronic instruments, producing erratic compass readings and faint static in radios, creating a sense that the island's weather itself resisted measurement or control. Compasses spun briefly without explanation, and radios emitted faint, untraceable signals, making communication with the boat difficult. The explorers noted that GPS signals occasionally lagged, a quirk consistent with rugged terrain but disconcerting given the proximity to open water. These anomalies heightened alertness, leaving the team uncertain whether they faced natural interference or something more inexplicable. Every instrument that failed reinforced the impression that the watchtower and its environment operated under rules that the human mind struggled to grasp. Seabirds wheeled overhead and occasionally plunged into the churning water, their cries echoing against stone in ways that seemed almost deliberate, adding a haunting cadence to the explorers' movements. Shadows cast by the birds, and the tower merged with jagged cliffs, producing shifting illusions of motion. Onlookers could sense the rhythm of life above and below the waterline, but remained uncertain where natural behaviour ended and the eerie influence of the place began. The bird's presence, while factual, contributed to a feeling of being observed. Even as the team concentrated on navigation and documentation, instinctive unease reminded them that the island had been a sentinel for centuries, observing without pause. As they reached the topmost observation deck, the wind intensified, and the tower seemed to vibrate under the force of gusts, producing subtle creaks and groans that suggested the structure itself was responding to the intrusion. The explorers clutched railings and leaned into the wind, aware that a misstep could be catastrophic. Sea spray stung faces, and waves below crashed against cliffs with sudden bursts of noise, masking other sounds entirely. In this heightened environment, the tower became both protector and threat, a human-made structure enduring natural violence while presenting psychological pressure. Every groan and whistle of metal intensified the sense that the island demanded both caution and respect. Suddenly, a patch of dense fog rolled in from the sea, enveloping the team, disorienting their perception of distance and direction, and amplifying the sense of vulnerability on the narrow ledges overlooking the crashing waves. The thick mist muted colours, flattened depth perception, and made familiar paths appear alien. The explorers huddled together, relying on touch and prior knowledge rather than sight. Sounds of wind, water, and metal became distorted, blending into a single disorienting auditory experience. Time seemed to stretch, and the constant danger of the cliffs below became more immediate. The fog created a moment suspended between natural hazard and something subtly uncanny, leaving the team acutely aware of the tower's dominance. Descending cautiously, the explorers reflected on every step, aware that the combination of isolation, weather, and the tower's enduring presence created an atmosphere that was both awe-inspiring and profoundly unsettling. The climb down was meticulous, with each handhold tested and each step carefully placed. They noted the lingering effects of wind and fog, the odd echoes that persisted long after sound ceased, and the overall impression of being watched by the island itself. Even as physical danger abated slightly, the psychological weight remained. Every glance over the shoulder reinforced the feeling that the island and its watchtower held secrets that had persisted for generations, unseen but not absent. As the boat finally pulled away, the watchtower remained etched against the horizon, silent yet resolute, as if it had absorbed every secret the island had ever refused to reveal. The collapsed mining shaft of Wittenoom. Dust hung thick in the dry red air as the expedition reached the outskirts of Wittenoom, a ghost town abandoned after decades of asbestos mining. The skeletal remains of buildings casting long shadows over the cracked earth. Broken roads and rusted fences marked the town's boundary, warning of contamination and danger. The wind carried fine dust that coated faces and clothes, hinting at the invisible hazard that had driven residents away decades earlier. Even before approaching the shaft, the explorers felt a tension that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, as if the abandoned town and its mine retained a lingering, watchful presence. Once a bustling hub of industry, Wittenoom had been founded in the 1940s to support the asbestos mine, which later became infamous for its deadly blue asbestos and the rapid closure that left the town off-limits to the public. Historical records documented the health crises that followed prolonged exposure, and the Australian government officially condemned the site. Maps showed the collapsed shafts and restricted zones, yet local reports hinted that some passages remained accessible, dangerous, and unstable. The explorers understood that even brief exposure carried risks, but curiosity and the chance to document a forbidden place outweighed caution, drawing them toward a site few had approached in decades. The entrance to the collapsed mining shaft lay partially hidden beneath a tangle of rusted machinery and broken wooden supports, each element a testament to both human ambition and decades of decay under a relentless Australian sun. Beams splintered with age, and corroded steel reinforced the sense of abandonment. Dusty footprints and small piles of debris suggested prior incursions, though no one had lived in the area for years. The team approached carefully, noting every unstable surface. The shadows of the surrounding wreckage distorted perception, making the shaft appear both larger and narrower than it truly was. Even the angle of the sun cast eerie patterns that suggested a place frozen in time and danger. Every step toward the shaft revealed new hazards: loose rocks, splintered timbers, and fine dust that coated boots and skin, carrying microscopic fibres that had long been known to cause deadly respiratory diseases. The explorers wore protective gear, but every inhale felt risky. Walking across the uneven ground required concentration, with each step potentially sending dust into the air or triggering minor collapses in the brittle terrain. Rusted nails and jagged metal occasionally protruded, catching clothing and scraping hands. The combination of environmental risk and structural decay made each movement deliberate. The surrounding silence amplified the faint creaks and cracks from the old infrastructure, reminding the team of the mine's latent danger. Scattered tools, forgotten helmets, and remnants of survey equipment hinted at previous expeditions or maintenance, their presence a chilling reminder that human curiosity had always brushed against the mine's dangers. Paper notes partially disintegrated suggested measurements and logs left behind, while broken lamp fixtures lay abandoned in corners. Graffiti marked with dates and initials hinted at undocumented visits, confirming that this site had drawn adventurers and researchers despite official prohibitions. Each artifact told a story of risk and neglect, and the explorers treated them with both caution and reverence. The evidence of past human activity reinforced the notion that the mine was as much a silent witness as it was a hazard. The descent began cautiously, with the team ducking under fallen beams and peering into shadowed gaps where the shaft had partially collapsed, revealing only fragments of the tunnels below. Their headlamps cut through darkness, highlighting broken wooden supports and jagged rocks. Dust motes floated in the narrow beams of light, giving the tunnel an almost otherworldly quality. Sounds were muted, absorbed by rubble, yet small creaks seemed amplified, echoing unnaturally. The explorers documented the layout meticulously, knowing that one wrong step could destabilize the passage. The sensation of moving through a half-forgotten labyrinth of human labor and decay created both awe and unease, emphasizing the mine's enduring power to intimidate. The air inside was thick, dusty, and strangely still, carrying the faint metallic scent of rust and the subtle weight of decades of human labor abandoned and left to disintegrate. Every inhale seemed heavier, and even small movements stirred clouds of fibers that hung in the air. The explorers noted the oppressive silence, interrupted only by occasional falls of debris or the shifting of old timber. Shadows extended unnaturally along the walls, distorting perception. The team felt acutely aware of their own fragility in this environment, a mixture of curiosity and caution shaping every decision. The mine was no longer just a physical challenge. It imposed a psychological pressure that made the air itself seem threatening. Timbers groaned under pressure, and the floor shifted slightly with each step, emphasizing the mine's instability and the risk that a minor misstep could trigger a larger collapse. Rusted metal rods bent under weight, and splintered planks threatened to give way. The explorers tested each surface carefully, using poles to check footing and tap beams before advancing. The structure's history of decay and poor support was evident in every creak, forcing the team to move deliberately. The awareness that a single collapse could entrap them underscored the mine's latent danger. Even the sound of their own breathing felt amplified, echoing through narrow passages and heightening tension with every cautious step. Unexplained drafts moved through the shafts, sometimes carrying cold air or faint echoes that seemed out of place, while instruments occasionally registered erratic readings, unsettling even the most experienced explorers. Thermometers fluctuated without explanation, and compass needles wavered despite careful calibration. Small gusts of wind whistled through cracks in walls, sounding like distant footsteps or whispers. The team paused repeatedly, questioning whether natural causes or unseen anomalies produced these effects. Each fluctuation created a sense that the mine had its own will, reacting to their presence. Even simple measurements became a source of uncertainty, adding an extra layer of tension to the already hazardous environment. A narrow corridor twisted into near-complete darkness, and as the team advanced, the oppressive silence pressed in, broken only by distant rock falls or the faint scrape of boots on stone. The walls seemed closer with each step, enclosing them further in a claustrophobic embrace. Dust hung in shafts of light from their headlamps, and shadows flickered across irregular surfaces. every sound echoed and distorted, making the team unsure of distances or the origin of noises. The atmosphere created an almost tangible pressure, amplifying unease. Moving forward required both courage and concentration, with the ever-present knowledge that the shaft could collapse without warning. Suddenly, a minor collapse occurred ahead, dust and small debris blocking the route and sending the team scrambling back, creating a tense scramble that underscored both the shaft's fragility and the ever-present threat of unseen hazards. The sound of falling timber and stone reverberated through the tunnels, startling even seasoned explorers. Coughing from dust, the team retreated, testing each surface before moving again. The partial blockage forced them to reconsider their route, emphasizing the mine's unpredictability. Even after the immediate danger passed, a lingering sense of fragility remained. The event reminded the team that Wittenoom's shafts were not just abandoned, they were active hazards, constantly reshaping the space through decay and gravity. Climbing toward the surface, the explorers felt the weight of the mine's history pressing on them. Each fragment of timber and dust-laden corner, a reminder of lives affected and dangers that lingered long after the shafts were sealed. The sun above seemed harsh and almost alien after the oppressive gloom, yet it revealed the stark, desolate landscape that had consumed a once lively town. Every glance back at the collapsed shaft carried unease, and every step towards safety reinforced the awareness that the mine's legacy was both physical and psychological. Even leaving, the explorers sensed that the space retained a memory of past labour, disease and secrecy. The collapsed shaft behind them loomed silently, its shadows holding secrets no one had yet dared to uncover. The restricted forest of Hoia-Baciu. The expedition entered Hoia-Baciu forest under a grey morning sky, where twisted trees formed nearly impenetrable walls, and local warnings about the area's strange phenomena weighed heavily on the team's minds. Signs of human presence were scarce, replaced by gnarled branches and thick undergrowth that distorted sightlines and muffled footsteps. Even the birds seemed absent, leaving only the whisper of wind through the foliage. Every step forward felt uncertain, as though the forest itself was testing intruders. Maps and compasses proved unreliable, and the team's awareness heightened, sensing that this was not a place governed solely by ordinary natural law. Legends of disappearing hikers, sudden flashes of unexplained light, and peculiar electromagnetic readings had circulated for decades, earning the forest a reputation as one of Romania's most enigmatic natural sites. Local accounts spoke of lost time, people emerging hours later from areas they could not have crossed, and instruments failing inexplicably. Scientific studies noted unusual magnetic disturbances and sporadic optical anomalies, though no definitive explanations existed. The explorers considered these reports carefully, balancing skepticism with curiosity, aware that entering a restricted area would expose them to conditions that combined both documented hazards and the intangible mysteries that had long fascinated researchers and adventurers alike. Paths quickly became difficult to follow as the undergrowth thickened, and the explorers noticed patches of vegetation that appeared strangely bent or stunted, almost as if the forest itself resisted passage. Branches twisted into unnatural angles, and moss-covered roots created trip hazards in a place that seemed both alive and watchful. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in irregular beams, casting shadows that appeared to shift when not directly observed. Small clearings appeared at intervals, often eerily symmetrical or unnaturally barren, provoking unease. Every glance revealed subtle anomalies, bark patterns that seemed deliberate, moss that grew in peculiar shapes, and the occasional absence of sound that contradicted expectation. A sudden chill swept through the area despite the mild temperature, carrying faint, unidentifiable sounds that seemed to originate from nowhere, unsettling the team and heightening awareness of every movement. Twigs snapped underfoot yet echoed differently than anticipated, while distant rustling suggested movement just beyond perception. Even the light shifted subtly, producing flickers and shadows that felt coordinated with the explorers' steps. The team paused, scanning the undergrowth for evidence of wildlife, but found only silence. Each inhale brought tension, and a quiet sense of being observed settled in. The forest's atmosphere became a presence in itself, pressing upon thoughts and testing the resolve of those who dared enter. Time felt distorted as they progressed deeper into the forest. with landmarks appearing to shift or vanish entirely, making navigation a disorienting exercise and leaving the explorers questioning their own perception. Trees once passed appeared unfamiliar moments later, and faint paths seemed to lead back upon themselves. Instruments designed to measure distance and orientation registered anomalies, heightening the impression of a place where conventional rules were suspended. Conversations became quieter, strained by uncertainty, and the team remained alert to sudden changes in air movement or sound. The psychological weight of disorientation was compounded by the forest reputation, making each step forward simultaneously compelling and unnerving. A small clearing emerged, bare of vegetation except for a few gnarled branches, and the team paused, struck by the unusual stillness and the sense that they were being observed by an unseen presence. The ground was covered in leaf litter, yet no footprints or animal tracks could be discerned. Headlamps revealed a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer that moved across the clearing's perimeter, vanishing when approached. Conversations faltered, replaced by quiet observation, as explorers documented measurements and took photographs of a space that seemed to exist outside conventional understanding. The clearing's anomalies suggested not only a natural quirk, but a localized phenomenon whose origin remained entirely unexplained. Faint glimmers of light flickered between the trees, appearing at times as reflections, at others as glowing orbs that moved in ways inconsistent with natural sunlight or shadows. The explorers observed them cautiously, adjusting cameras and sensors in an attempt to capture the phenomena. Some lights seemed to react to movement, vanishing when approached, while others remained stationary, yet imperceptibly shifted between glimpses. The interplay of light, shadow and tree trunks created illusions that challenged perception, forcing the team to continually question whether they were observing optical effects, reflections, or something entirely unknown. The forest seemed to manipulate visibility itself, blending reality with uncertainty. Unease spread among the team as whispers of past expeditions and unexplained disappearances filled their thoughts, and subtle tensions arose in the quiet, prompting closer attention to one another and the forest around them. Each explorer became hyper-aware of sounds, the shifting canopy and the spacing of fellow team members. Brief, unidentifiable noises were interpreted as possible warnings or signs. The forest seemed to create its own rhythm, one that did not correspond with human movement or expectation. Even seasoned explorers found themselves pausing frequently, reflecting on how little they truly understood about a place whose secrets had persisted for generations. A low rustling echoed through the undergrowth, yet no animal appeared, and small objects seemed displaced when glanced at indirectly, intensifying the team's growing suspicion that the forest defied conventional explanation. Sticks shifted between observations, and leaves occasionally fluttered without discernible cause. Attempts to trace the source of sounds were futile, as each step seemed to produce new anomalies. The explorers noted these patterns meticulously, though they could not explain them, reinforcing the forest's reputation for strangeness. The tension was compounded by the isolation of the location and the impossibility of immediate retreat, forcing the team to confront the unknown directly. Deeper exploration revealed a sudden bank of fog that rolled in without wind, obscuring familiar trees and forcing the team to rely on intuition as their instruments registered inexplicable readings. Visibility dropped sharply, and shadows became indistinct shapes, creating a sense of both distance and proximity that contradicted physical measurement. The fog appeared concentrated in pockets, moving against expected air currents. Temperature variations were subtle yet noticeable, and the team hesitated to proceed without verifying footing. The combination of visual obstruction and unexplainable sensory input created a momentary environment in which perception itself seemed unreliable, heightening psychological tension and suspense. Retreat became necessary when the light anomalies intensified, reflecting in shifting patterns and shapes that suggested movement or intelligence, compelling the team to acknowledge that the forest's secrets were far from ordinary. Each reflection and flicker reinforced the impression that the environment was responding to their presence. Instruments continued to register anomalous readings, while shadows appeared inconsistent with their sources. The explorers moved carefully, documenting evidence as they retreated, aware that even exiting might not fully remove them from the forest's influence. The realization dawned that Hoia-Baciu was more than a location. It was a place where conventional understanding had no certainty. Walking back toward the edge of the forest, the explorers reflected on the disorienting events, the strange clearings, and the sense that Hoia-Baciu held truths that might never be fully understood. The path out seemed simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar, with trees and undergrowth subtly rearranged in perception. Instruments gradually returned to normal readings, yet the memory of anomalies persisted. Conversations turned to speculation, and each team member considered the forest's capacity to confound, intimidate, and challenge even experienced observers. The boundary between known and unknown remained fragile, and the forest's reputation for producing inexplicable events felt entirely justified. Shadows clung to the twisted trunks, as if the forest itself had decided which stories would remain hidden from the world. The deserted airbase of Pripyat. A pale grey sky hung over the remnants of the Pripyat airbase, where cracked runways stretched into the distance and hangars leaned under decades of neglect. Rusted vehicles and toppled signage littered the tarmac, evidence of a human presence long since vanished. It was into this abandoned expanse that the expedition stepped cautiously, aware of both the radioactive exclusion zone and the stories of strange events reported by earlier explorers. The silence was almost complete, broken only by distant echoes of wind through metal and concrete. Historical records revealed the airbase's role during the Cold War as a training and operational hub, later abandoned abruptly after the Chernobyl disaster left the area officially off-limits. The expedition had reviewed these accounts carefully, noting the combination of industrial decay and environmental hazard that defined the site. Weathered hangars stood in rows, their metal frames corroded, roofs partially collapsed, and doors twisted as though resisting intrusion. Concrete runways bore cracks wide enough to let grass grow through, creating a surreal contrast of life and abandonment. The team's instruments, checked repeatedly, confirmed they were beyond the monitored zones. Approaching the main hangars, the explorers were struck by the sheer scale of decay. Aircraft that had not moved in decades leaned at impossible angles, their wings sagging under rust and corrosion. Broken propellers, faded insignia, and shattered glass told the story of sudden evacuation and long neglect. The expedition documented each anomaly carefully, photographing structural failures and unusual arrangements of equipment. Despite the openness of the site, the absence of movement and sound intensified the sense that time itself had stopped within these fences. Even birds avoided certain areas, reinforcing the impression that the base remained under some unseen influence. Inside a massive hangar, scattered tools and machinery lay untouched, layered with dust and peeling paint. The expedition noted notebooks, oil cans, and folded tarps that had lain undisturbed for decades, each artifact frozen in a moment of halted routine. Sunlight filtered through jagged windows, producing sharp patterns on the cracked concrete floor, while shadows from steel beams seemed to stretch and twist in unusual ways. Every step stirred dust motes that shimmered in the light, giving the impression of ghostly activity. The explorers exchanged quiet observations, reflecting on the eerie intimacy of a place that had once been so active yet now felt completely abandoned. Walking across cracked tarmacs, the team encountered rusted vehicles, toppled signage, and fallen fences, a desolate landscape that was both expansive and unnervingly silent. Each step seemed amplified in the emptiness, and the wind carried sound differently across open spaces, sometimes producing sharp metallic echoes from nowhere. Even distant structures appeared alive with memory, their dilapidated frames suggesting fleeting motion in peripheral vision. The explorers paused frequently, checking instruments for radiation, wind direction, and compass readings, yet found nothing conclusive. The scale of abandonment alone was enough to unsettle, highlighting how human absence could magnify the natural world's ordinary noises into an almost otherworldly soundscape. A steady, chilling wind swept through open hangars and crumbling control towers, producing haunting whistling through gaps and broken metal. The expedition noted how even the smallest movements, sliding doors, loose panels, resonated across long corridors, creating echoes that seemed to mimic human footsteps. Shadows elongated unnaturally as sunlight shifted, sometimes giving the impression of figures moving at the edge of vision. Instruments occasionally flickered without explanation, reinforcing the team's awareness of uncertainty. The explorers became increasingly conscious of their isolation, aware that a combination of decay, silence, and structural acoustics was shaping perception in subtle and unnerving ways. Climbing the stairwell of a control tower, the expedition discovered offices frozen in time, chairs tipped over, notebooks still open, radios positioned as if waiting for someone to return. Dust-covered keyboards and telephones suggested routines that had been abruptly interrupted. The explorers examined faded schedules and maps on walls, noticing markings that indicated past exercises, air routes, and personnel rotations. Even mundane artifacts, coffee mugs, broken light bulbs, seemed imbued with a presence shaped by absence. In this elevated vantage, the expanse of the airbase unfolded below, its empty hangars, cracked runways, and distant forests forming a landscape simultaneously static and hauntingly alive with memory. In one communications room, a flicker of light reflected from broken glass, briefly illuminating a corner that seemed otherwise unremarkable. Nearby, a minor instrument anomaly registered on a radiation meter, small enough to be dismissed yet enough to provoke careful observation. The expedition documented these occurrences meticulously, comparing them with known electrical malfunctions and historical reports of environmental interference. Though rational explanations were possible, the combination of reflection, minor readings, and the sense of being watched reinforced the forest's, or rather, the airbase's, capacity to unsettle. Every recorded detail suggested that the airbase had secrets lingering beyond human perception. Isolation weighed heavily on the explorers as they moved between hangars, barracks, and storage sheds, the emptiness magnified by awareness of the site's history and post-disaster abandonment. Rusted stairwells and metal catwalks groaned beneath light steps, while cracked windows framed nothing but sky and distant forests. Even wind currents seemed unpredictable, twisting through corridors and producing minor echoes of undefined origin. Conversations became subdued, filled with the occasional speculative remark about past workers, vanished personnel, or rumours of strange sightings. The psychological impact of walking through a place where life had once been concentrated yet was now completely absent began to leave its mark on each member. Suddenly, a metallic clatter echoed across the tarmac, startling the team, yet no source could be identified. Shadows of hangars and equipment appeared to shift in the corner of vision, creating illusions of movement. The explorers exchanged wary glances, cautious to distinguish between natural structural responses and phenomena outside ordinary explanation. Attempts to trace the sound produced only more uncertainty, as echoes bounced unpredictably off metal surfaces. Instruments returned nominal readings, yet the combination of auditory anomaly and visual distortion left the team questioning whether the airbase retained some residual presence or intelligence that persisted long after human departure. The expedition decided to retreat, moving slowly and deliberately through these open hangars and cracked runways, aware that each step seemed magnified by the isolation and scale of decay. The interplay of light, shadow, and distance reinforced the impression of subtle movement, while reflections from broken glass and metal continued to provoke speculation. Conversations remained muted, with periodic observations recorded and shared cautiously. As the team left the core of the airbase behind, a lingering sense of vigilance persisted, as though the structures themselves had maintained an awareness of their passage and were observing the retreat with patient silence. Exiting the perimeter, the explorers reflected on the disorienting combination of structural decay, subtle anomalies, and the psychological tension imposed by such a vast abandoned site. The sheer scale of the airbase and its frozen artifacts left a lasting impression, while minor unexplained occurrences reinforced the impossibility of full comprehension. Observations were carefully noted for later analysis, yet some questions remained unanswerable, whether the anomalies were environmental, psychological, or something entirely beyond ordinary experience. The deserted airbase of Pripyat had preserved its secrets, and the expedition understood that leaving would not erase the impression of being watched and the questions left unanswered. Rusted wings and broken towers loomed against the grey horizon, as if the airbase itself kept silent watch over its forgotten stories. The sealed temple of Derinkuyu. Shadows pooled in the entrance to the Derinkuyu complex, where stone staircases spiraled downward into darkness, disappearing from view within narrow tunnels. Dust drifted in sunbeams that barely reached the first chambers, illuminating the rough textures of volcanic rock carved centuries ago. The expedition moved cautiously into this ancient labyrinth, aware of both the labyrinthine architecture and the legends of strange occurrences reported by archaeologists and local guides. Each step echoed off stone walls, magnifying the silence, while the air carried a faint, musty scent of history and human habitation, long abandoned. Previous records revealed Derinkuyu as a multi-level underground city, carved to shelter thousands during periods of invasion and conflict. Its tunnels, storage rooms, and ventilation shafts were designed with remarkable precision, reflecting centuries of Anatolian engineering. The expedition had studied these layouts before entering, noting the intricate network of stairways, hidden chambers, and defensive stone doors. Maps of prior excavations provided some guidance, but gaps remained, and much of the city was still uncharted. The explorers understood that the structure's purpose went beyond mere shelter. It was a testament to human survival and secrecy, constructed with a knowledge lost to modern observers. The stairwell narrowed sharply, forcing the team to descend single file, their headlamps bouncing across uneven walls and carved niches. Passageways branched unexpectedly, some leading to storage rooms, others ending abruptly in sealed doors, their ancient mechanisms rusted but still intact. Echoes distorted their footsteps, amplifying every clink of metal or scrape of boot against stone. The explorers paused frequently, consulting maps and discussing which path might lead to the lower chambers rumoured to hold hidden artefacts. Even with prior study, the labyrinthine structure of Derinkuyu made orientation difficult, and small details like carvings or displaced stones took on unsettling significance under the dim light. In one chamber, the explorers found evidence of long-term habitation: pottery fragments, animal bones, and worn stair treads that hinted at daily life centuries ago. The walls bore faint markings, perhaps ancient graffiti or ritual symbols, partially obscured by centuries of soot and dust. Air in the room felt cooler and heavier, as if the stone absorbed both heat and memory. The expedition documented every corner, photographing artifacts and measuring dimensions with careful precision. Though no immediate threat was present, the narrowness of the tunnels and the weight of history produced an almost tangible tension that pressed on the explorers' senses. Stone doors with rolling mechanisms marked transitions to more restricted areas, where tunnels became tighter and ceilings lower. Ventilation shafts channeled stale air in complex patterns, sometimes producing sudden gusts that carried echoes from distant passages. The explorers noted how the city's design cleverly balanced concealment with livability, using natural ventilation to prevent suffocation in confined chambers. Every turn revealed more ingenuity: hidden storage niches, wells that reached underground water sources, and staircases that doubled as emergency exits. The sense of deliberate secrecy intensified, making it clear that the builders had intended to leave many aspects of the city inaccessible or undiscovered. Dripping water and subtle air currents introduced a constant, eerie rhythm, each drop resonating differently across tunnels. The expedition's footsteps seemed amplified, yet other sounds, whispers of wind shifting dust, suggested movement in unseen corners. Occasionally temperature shifts were noticeable, sudden chills that passed across the team and raised the hair on their arms. Instruments carried to measure humidity, airflow and temperature verified unusual but explainable readings, yet their presence did little to diminish the unease. Every chamber seemed to hold a memory, a whisper of centuries past, as if the stone itself remembered the people who once moved through these secret spaces. The explorers discovered a passage partially blocked by a collapsed stone arch, beyond which lay a smaller chamber sealed for centuries. Ancient mechanisms remained visible. Iron fittings rusted yet still in place, suggesting the door had been intended to be opened only rarely. The team examined the area carefully, noting scratches, dust patterns, and the alignment of rolling stones. Lanterns highlighted subtle carvings that might have been markers or warnings, now mostly illegible. Despite the careful documentation, a sense of apprehension took hold, amplified by the claustrophobic architecture and the uncertainty of what might lie beyond the sealed chamber. A faint, almost imperceptible hum resonated from deeper tunnels, seemingly without source. The expedition paused, unsure whether it was structural vibrations, wind, or something unexplained. Shadows from headlamps flickered in corners that had no direct light, producing the illusion of movement. minor instruments sometimes registered transient anomalies, temperature shifts, slight air pressure changes, even faint magnetic disturbances. While rational explanations existed, the combination of sound, shadow, and subtle instrumentation produced a cumulative sense of being watched or observed, heightening tension and sharpening the explorer's focus on each step and choice in the labyrinth. Psychological effects became evident as the team pressed further into narrow, twisting passages. The monotony of stone walls, repetition of tunnels, and lack of natural light contributed to disorientation and subtle claustrophobia. Conversation slowed to whispers, and careful note-taking became a way to maintain awareness. Some explorers experienced fleeting illusions of movement or peripheral figures, which vanished when directly observed. The cumulative stress of navigating centuries-old architecture while remaining alert to both environmental hazards and the possibility of strange phenomena created a palpable tension, making each chamber feel both familiar and alien, simultaneously protective and threatening. A sudden tremor of dust and a faint clatter startled the expedition, though no obvious cause was visible. One of the rolling stone doors had shifted slightly, as if nudged by an unseen hand, though no vibration from the surface had been recorded. The explorers scrutinized the area carefully, considering natural settling, hidden drafts, or misaligned mechanisms, yet the timing of the event felt unsettling. Shadows deepened and shifted in ways inconsistent with light sources, producing the impression of subtle, deliberate motion. The experience left the team wary, each member silently acknowledging that the underground city still held secrets beyond human understanding. The retreat through winding passages was deliberate, cautious, and reflective. Each step retraced the expedition's route, but familiar corridors now seemed subtly altered, either by memory or by unseen environmental effects. The interplay of echoing footsteps, flickering lanterns, and shifting shadows maintained a lingering tension. The explorers paused occasionally to record measurements, document chamber layouts, and note minor anomalies, aware that the city's design, history, and any remaining mysteries could never be fully captured. By the time they reached the first main stairwell, a sense of relief mixed with reverence, tempered by the knowledge that much remained hidden beyond the sealed chambers they had glimpsed. Emerging into daylight, the explorers felt the weight of centuries lift slightly, yet the memory of tight tunnels, secret doors, and inexplicable anomalies lingered. The sealed chambers retained an aura of intentional concealment, as though the original builders had designed them to resist curiosity and time alike. The expedition's careful observations provided some answers, yet the city still held more than could be comprehensively understood. Each participant reflected on the ingenuity, history, and subtle mysteries they had encountered, aware that even the most methodical documentation could not capture the full depth of the temple's concealed secrets. Below the streets of Derinkuyu, the sealed chambers remained untouched, holding secrets that had quietly endured through centuries of silence. The Forbidden Zone of Mount Mahara. A low hum reverberated across the volcanic slopes, hinting at forces shifting deep within the blackened rock. By the time the expedition arrived at the lower ridges, the sense of danger was palpable, and every loose stone seemed to echo with unseen movement. Their route followed an old monitoring trail, now partially obscured by volcanic deposits, yet caution dictated every step. The forbidden nature of the area was evident in the official barriers and warning signs, though these human markers seemed almost insignificant against the immense, brooding presence of Mount Mahara. Even distant tremors felt amplified in the stillness. Accounts of earlier eruptions described Izu Oshima's changing terrain, with hidden fissures and sudden drop-offs scattered throughout the Forbidden Zone. Geological surveys confirmed these features, and researchers noted that lava flows had carved unpredictable channels over centuries, leaving treacherous paths. The expedition consulted topographical maps and seismic records to avoid the most unstable areas, yet nothing could fully capture the crater's dynamic volatility. As the team advanced, they measured subtle variations in the ground, aware that each fissure or hollow could conceal sudden heat vents or loose rock. Even well-documented hazards carried the weight of uncertainty in this remote environment. Steam rose unpredictably from narrow cracks, curling into the sky in shapes that seemed almost deliberate. its sulphurous aroma mingled with the faint scent of heated stone, creating an oppressive atmosphere that pressed on the senses. Occasionally, the explorers paused to photograph and record the venting, careful not to get too close to areas where the ground had weakened. Shadows cast by erratic sunlight shifted across the slopes, producing optical illusions that heightened unease. Each column of rising steam seemed alive, rising and twisting with a rhythm independent of wind or gravity. The forbidden zone revealed itself in fragments, both alluring and threatening. Jagged boulders lined the ascent, forcing careful steps along paths rarely traversed by humans. The team relied on ropes and trekking poles, moving in deliberate coordination to avoid dislodging stones that might trigger slides. Small markers, remnants of earlier surveys, were half buried by volcanic debris, a reminder of human attempts to tame the terrain. The path sometimes narrowed to a single line of footing, where a misstep could send a climber tumbling. Despite the danger, the sheer scale of the volcano evoked awe, with every slope, ridge and fissure emphasizing the raw power of Mount Mahara's forbidden reaches. Signs of prior monitoring, rusted instruments and collapsed markers hinted at past incursions into the crater rim. These relics suggested human curiosity had always struggled against the volcano's unpredictable nature. Broken tripods, weathered metal poles, and faded safety instructions marked points where researchers once documented activity, but now only the wind and occasional tremor moved them. The expedition carefully noted their locations, attempting to trace the paths of those who'd come before. Even in decay, these artifacts provided insight into the volcano's activity and a silent warning of what could happen to those who ventured without preparation. The weight of isolation pressed down, creating a sense that the volcano itself was watching. Every distant rumble, every hiss of escaping gas reminded the explorers that they were intruding on a domain far older than humanity. The lack of other visitors, combined with the scale of the crater and surrounding ridges, made the team hyper-aware of their vulnerability. Thoughts turned inward, as each member contemplated the vastness and indifference of the volcanic landscape. Conversations were minimal and silence carried a tension that no sound could break, the forbidden zone amplifying every heartbeat and every step along the rocky trail. An unexpected shift in loose stone revealed a narrow passage previously concealed from view. Its edges were partially obscured by steam and loose ash, yet the team carefully navigated through, sensing both opportunity and danger. The passage led toward a series of smaller fumaroles, where heat had softened the volcanic soil. The explorers paused to mark coordinates, observing the irregularity of the terrain. Though it offered a closer perspective on Mount Mahara's activity, the corridor also demanded extreme caution, as minor disturbances could trigger rock slides or sudden vents. Even within a forbidden zone, every discovery brought with it a heightened sense of responsibility and alertness. A faint vibration traveled through the ground, pulsing in time with the distant rumble of the crater. Instruments recorded minor seismic activity, yet the sensation felt more pronounced underfoot, as if the volcano itself were acknowledging their presence. The hum persisted as they moved along ridges, accompanied by subtle shifts in temperature and air pressure. Shadows appeared to quiver at the edge of vision, producing the faint illusion of movement. Rational explanations existed, but the combination of vibration, heat, and visual trickery created a feeling that the forbidden slopes possessed secrets beyond observation, and that each step might reveal something no one had seen before. The team's focus narrowed as shadows lengthened across ridges, producing fleeting illusions of movement. Fumaroles cast dancing shapes across the ground, while gusts of wind carried distant echoing sounds that could not be identified. The explorers grew attentive to every detail, aware that a misperception could lead to accidents or misinterpretations. Each footfall required balance, every glance measured. The forbidden zone pressed on perception, mixing environmental hazards with subtle sensory distortions that made the volcano feel alive, almost conscious, as though it could manipulate both terrain and awareness to communicate its indifference to human intrusion. A sudden release of heated gas burst from a vent, forcing the explorers to pause and regroup. The eruption of steam was accompanied by a sharp spike in ground temperature and a subtle shift in air pressure, enough to startle the team without causing harm. Instruments captured the readings, but the explorers remained focused on safety and observation. Shadows flickered within the venting mist, producing illusions of movement that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Even routine volcanic activity within a forbidden zone could be disorienting, a reminder that nature's power was unpredictable and often beyond human comprehension. Retracing their route along fractured paths, the expedition remained vigilant, aware of both terrain and unseen anomalies. The descent demanded steady attention to loose rock and shifting soil, as minor tremors and wind gusts could trigger dangerous slides. The team exchanged quiet notes on readings and observations, reviewing seismic data and vent patterns while moving. Despite the relative safety of lower ridges, the psychological weight of isolation and prior anomalies remained. Every ridge and fissure along the way seemed slightly different, the forbidden zone retaining its elusive, almost intangible characteristics that resisted full mapping or understanding by human explorers. At the base, the volcano loomed silently, leaving an impression of unresolved power. The lower slopes appeared calm, with distant vegetation swaying gently in the wind, yet the hum and subtle vibrations from higher ridges lingered in memory. Equipment was packed carefully, notes secured and readings documented, but the team could not ignore the impression that the volcano held more secrets than they could observe in a single expedition. Even as they stepped onto familiar terrain, the forbidden zone of Mount Mahara had left an indelible mark, blending scientific curiosity with a lingering, inexplicable sense of awe and unease. Mount Mahara's forbidden slopes continued to guard their secrets, indifferent to those who dared approach. The Lost Library of Ashurbanipal. Stone corridors, worn smooth by centuries of forgotten footsteps, revealed glimpses of chambers that had not been entered in millennia. The expedition approached cautiously, aware that the ruins had withstood time, conflict, and natural decay. Among the scattered debris, fragments of plaster walls hinted at ornate decoration and complex shelving, suggesting the immense scale of Ashurbanipal's library. As the team advanced, they could sense the weight of history pressing in, a silent testament to human ambition and knowledge lost. Every careful step was a reminder that fragile structures could crumble under miscalculated movement, erasing centuries in an instant. Clay tablets and cuneiform inscriptions lay scattered, hinting at the grandeur of a library whose contents once rivaled the ambitions of empires. Many fragments bore the marks of cataloguing systems now indecipherable, yet the sheer number indicated a collection beyond ordinary comprehension. Scholars on the team examined patterns in the script, tracing references to rulers, scribes, and events that defined the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Each fragment carried echoes of voices long silenced, whispering knowledge and warnings that modern understanding could only partially grasp. Despite careful handling, the explorers felt the weight of absence, as if unseen hands had removed key pieces intentionally, leaving a gap in history itself. Collapsed walls formed precarious passages, each step demanding careful attention to the fragile masonry above. Fallen beams and stone blocks created a labyrinthine network, where every corridor could conceal hidden chambers or trigger minor rockfalls. The team measured vibrations, testing stability before proceeding, aware that ancient mortar had weakened over centuries. Notes from earlier archaeological surveys hinted at similar hazards, but first-hand observation revealed details not recorded in records, from subtle cracks to eroded foundations. The expedition navigated these spaces deliberately, balancing curiosity with caution, understanding that the line between discovery and disaster was perilously thin in a structure that had survived millennia, yet seemed always ready to shift unpredictably. Faint markings etched into plaster caught the eye, seeming to shift under changing perspectives, almost as if the walls were communicating. The team traced patterns of lines and symbols that resembled cataloguing notations, ritual warnings, or perhaps instructions for storing sacred texts. Some signs aligned with architectural elements, hinting at hidden compartments or structural quirks designed for preservation. Scholars debated whether the markings were original to Ashurbanipal's era or later additions by caretakers, adding to the sense of layered mystery. Each revelation prompted careful photography and measurement, yet the inscription's subtle ambiguity created a lingering doubt, as if the walls themselves had been designed to challenge interpretation and conceal secrets from casual observers. The expedition documented every fragment with meticulous care, aware that even the smallest misstep could destroy irreplaceable evidence. Tablets were catalogued, sketches made, and photographic records captured minute inscriptions, all while environmental sensors monitored vibrations, humidity, and structural integrity. The explorers found that some shelves and niches had been disturbed in ways that suggested human or unknown interference after initial collapse. Every action was measured against potential risk, with tools used sparingly to avoid inadvertent damage. The careful combination of archaeological rigour and heightened alertness created a tense rhythm where knowledge acquisition existed alongside the constant possibility that centuries-old instability could claim both artefacts and researchers alike. Narrow staircases, hidden beneath fallen masonry, led deeper into vaults untouched by modern hands, revealing architecture that defied conventional plans. The explorers descended cautiously, noting unusual supports, vaulted ceilings, and evidence of deliberate compartmentalization that suggested some texts were intentionally hidden. The stairs twisted into shadowed corners where air pressure changes and subtle echoes created a sense of otherworldliness. Experts theorized that the design served both security and preservation, but the obscurity fueled imagination and unease. Each step revealed niches with faint traces of past cataloguing, and the team wondered how much of the library's immense contents remained hidden, untouched by time or human intervention, still waiting to reveal its secrets. Ancient storage niches held empty spaces where treasures had vanished, leaving a sense of deliberate absence. These voids suggested either systematic removal or the enigmatic disappearance of texts and artifacts long before modern excavation. Scholars compared notes on fragment locations, attempting to map gaps that could reveal patterns in disappearance or concealment. The emptiness created a palpable tension, as though the site itself had been designed to test patience and curiosity. Some niches were carefully aligned with inscriptions or structural anomalies, hinting that missing artifacts may have been part of sophisticated archival strategies. Each empty cavity contributed to the eerie sensation that knowledge had been intentionally sequestered beyond reach. Seals and inscriptions bore warnings in Akkadian, invoking rituals or prohibitions whose meanings had faded but whose gravity lingered. These symbols appeared in key junctions and storage areas, sometimes partially obscured by debris. The team debated their significance, whether they marked sacred space, protective incantations, or bureaucratic designations. Attempts to translate them yielded partial understanding, often raising more questions than answers. Scholars reflected on the cultural context, realizing that some warnings were intended to keep knowledge confined, while others might have served as deterrents to thieves or intruders. Each reading reinforced the sense that the library operated according to a logic not entirely accessible to outsiders. Unease grew as the team noticed inconsistencies in tablet placement and structural alignment, suggesting more than natural decay at work. Certain corridors appeared subtly shifted from documented plans, and fragments that should have aligned with shelves were found in unlikely locations. The pattern implied that someone or something had altered the space after initial collapse. Explorers exchanged cautious glances, weighing the implications of deliberate rearrangement versus accidental displacement. The anomalies compounded the impression that the library itself resisted straightforward observation, leaving the team aware that the more they investigated, the more the site seemed to challenge human understanding and invite speculation about forces beyond conventional explanation. A single artifact seemed to have shifted position between observations, leaving scholars questioning whether the phenomenon was human or otherwise entirely. The tablet rested on a shelf in the morning, yet by afternoon it had moved several inches unexplainably, without human interference. Cameras and environmental sensors confirmed the absence of external factors, yet the discrepancy remained. Team members speculated on vibrations, air currents, or subconscious handling, but none could account for the precise movement. The episode heightened vigilance, as each subsequent object was carefully checked and rechecked. Even with rational explanations explored, the anomaly reinforced the sense that the lost library retained a mysterious agency, guarding fragments of knowledge from easy discovery. Detailed notes, sketches, and photographs chronicled both discoveries and irregularities, yet some occurrences resisted explanation. Observations included subtle shifts in lighting, faint echoes, and spatial inconsistencies that challenged conventional measurement. The team cross-referenced historical records with their current findings, yet anomalies persisted. every successful documentation of fragments was balanced by questions that arose from missing pieces and unexplained placements. The tension between empirical evidence and inexplicable phenomena underscored the chapter of mystery inherent to the library. Scholars recognized that no matter how methodical their efforts, some aspects of Ashurbanipal's collection and the architecture designed to preserve it remained beyond human comprehension. Vaulted chambers extended into shadowed recesses, revealing only fragments of the library's original design and leaving much unresolved. Passages narrowed unpredictably, and staircases twisted into corners that suggested hidden levels. Faded murals hinted at ceremonial or archival significance, yet their meaning remained opaque. Explorers could only speculate about the full extent of the library, imagining rows of shelves, lost tablets, and hidden chambers inaccessible to modern eyes. The silence within these recesses was profound, interrupted only by the cautious footsteps of the team. Each passage emphasized both the magnitude of loss and the potential for discovery, leaving researchers acutely aware that the library still held secrets waiting to defy understanding. The lost library of Ashurbanipal remained, silent and unyielding, guarding secrets that time itself had failed to erase. The Cursed Bridge of Overtoun. The bridge spanned a narrow gorge, its aged stone arch rising above waters that whispered of history and countless untold stories. Built in the 19th century, Overtoun Bridge had long fascinated locals and visitors alike, its serene appearance belying a disturbing reputation. The expedition arrived with careful preparation, aware that curiosity had often led others to tragic or inexplicable events. Guides spoke in hushed tones about previous incidents, recounting both human and canine experiences, while researchers examined structural details. Every observation was filtered through layers of caution and intrigue, the team feeling both the weight of history and an invisible, persistent unease pressing from the shadows. Footprints of countless dogs and humans marred the moss-covered surface, each step a testament to generations who had crossed this eerie threshold. Muddy impressions and worn stone provided a subtle record of interaction, yet they hinted at something beyond ordinary passage. Investigators traced patterns where animals had approached the edges, seeking explanations rooted in terrain, scent, or instinct. Every indentation seemed to carry a story, a record of past encounters with the inexplicable. The explorers' notes meticulously documented these paths, though even the most careful scrutiny failed to clarify why so many dogs acted with sudden, uncontrollable urgency. The bridge seemed to record behavior without revealing its cause. Local lore told of unexplained incidents, recounting how animals sometimes leapt from the bridge without apparent cause, drawing both curiosity and fear. Newspaper accounts, veterinary reports, and witness testimonies painted a patchwork of tragedy and mystery. Some believed the steep drop invoked a supernatural influence, others suspected environmental or chemical factors. Regardless of theory, the consistency of reports over decades defied easy explanation. The team studied archival materials alongside direct observation, attempting to distinguish myth from reality. Even as the stories were dissected critically, a palpable tension lingered, an awareness that folklore often held kernels of truth obscured by fear, speculation, or memory. The expedition approached with equipment in hand, determined to record behaviour, yet aware that some mysteries might resist explanation entirely. Cameras, motion sensors, and audio recorders were carefully positioned along the bridge and its approaches. Researchers divided tasks, alternating between observation, documentation, and environmental monitoring. Protocols emphasized minimal interference, recognizing that human presence could inadvertently influence animal reactions. Each team member felt a subtle, shared apprehension, a collective acknowledgement that the bridge's reputation was more than legend. With preparation complete, the group settled into vigil, poised between empirical study and the unsettling knowledge that some phenomena might exceed rational understanding. Observers noted a sudden, inexplicable agitation among the dogs, their movements jerky, alert to something invisible just beyond perception. Several canines on leashes became tense, pulling toward one edge while refusing commands. Their ears twitched, heads darted, and bodies trembled, as if reacting to imperceptible stimuli. The team recorded every motion, cross-referencing with audio and environmental sensors, yet found no immediate explanation. Scholars debated whether subtle smells, temperature shifts, or unseen sounds could provoke such responses. Despite careful measurement, the reactions persisted, and the expedition felt the first real chill of uncertainty, the sense that the bridge itself might be influencing behaviour in ways science could not yet quantify. Hypotheses were debated quietly, from scent-driven reactions to electromagnetic anomalies, though no single theory accounted for all observed phenomena. Researchers analysed soil samples, humidity readings, and local wildlife activity seeking patterns. Some speculated that chemical compounds leaching from vegetation or stones might influence sensory perception. Others pointed to neurological or psychological triggers shared among animals. Each suggestion brought partial clarity but left gaps, as evidence failed to explain the most extreme incidents. Tension mounted as the team grappled with the limits of rational interpretation, while facing repeated anomalies that resisted categorization, and the bridge continued to loom as both subject and silent observer. The team's own unease grew, subtle tension threading through conversations and glances, each member conscious of the bridge's unsettling reputation. Personal histories with unexplained phenomena and the weight of prior accounts affected perception, as even minor shadows or sounds prompted attention. Researchers noted increased heart rates, brief lapses in focus, and the creeping awareness that the bridge exerted a psychological influence on humans as well as animals. Journals recorded every sensation, from fleeting chills to the inexplicable feeling of being observed. The expedition realized that objective documentation required constant self-awareness, a mental discipline as crucial as any camera or sensor in unraveling or simply surviving the bridge's mysteries. Shadows fell oddly across the structure, as though angles and perspectives shifted imperceptibly, provoking disorientation and questions about perception. Walkways, arches, and parapets seemed to warp in subtle ways depending on vantage point, creating an uneasy sense of instability. The explorers measured angles and light reflections, confirming that geometry alone could not explain the phenomena. Their instruments registered normal readings, yet subjective impressions of depth and slope persisted. The interplay of architecture and human perception created a tension in the mind, making each step forward deliberate. It became clear that understanding the bridge required attention not only to physical facts, but also to the strange layered perceptions it evoked in those who traversed it. An unexpected sound, faint yet distinct, echoed along the span, prompting careful documentation and increasing the sense of anticipation. The team paused, listening for repetition or source, yet found none. Recording devices captured only a subtle vibration, a noise too precise to be dismissed as wind or water movement. Canines reacted simultaneously, their ears alert and bodies tense. The juxtaposition of sensory observation and technological measurement created a paradox. The bridge seemed to register and respond in ways the team could neither predict nor fully record. Every anomaly reinforced a creeping realization that some aspects of the site defied conventional monitoring, heightening both intrigue and apprehension. Moments later, a camera captured a movement that no human or animal could explain, leaving the team to grapple with evidence they struggled to rationalize. A subtle shift in light or an unobserved displacement appeared on playback, seemingly originating from empty space. Multiple team members confirmed the absence of environmental factors, and repeated review left only the unexplained anomaly. The event prompted debate, skepticism, and cautious curiosity, forcing the group to confront the limits of both perception and interpretation. Each subsequent observation was measured against this inexplicable incident, underscoring the bridge's reputation as a place where ordinary expectation collided with phenomena that resisted conventional explanation. Folklore and observation intersected uneasily, creating a tension between what could be scientifically understood and what remained inexplicably persistent. Stories of prior incidents combined with contemporary measurements produced a layered narrative in which myth and data coexisted. The team considered the possibility that cultural expectation, collective memory, and unexplained physical phenomena were entwined in ways that confounded simple interpretation. Recording devices, careful logs, and eyewitness accounts produced partial clarity, yet the overall picture remained unresolved. Each documented anomaly reinforced a larger pattern. Overtoun Bridge was more than architecture and environment. It was a locus of interaction between perception, behaviour, and the unknown. As night approached, the bridge seemed to hold its breath, every stone and shadow conspiring to obscure the full truth from those who had come seeking it. Darkness deepened, and lights cast long, distorted reflections across the structure. Canines were calm yet alert, ears moving to imperceptible signals. The expedition carefully concluded observation, packing equipment while maintaining vigilance. Even as the team departed, the sense lingered that the bridge had communicated in ways subtle, inscrutable, and persistent. The haunting mix of history, architecture, and unexplained events left a lasting impression that human inquiry, however meticulous, might never fully penetrate the enigmas that had made the bridge infamous. The cursed bridge of Overtoun remained, silent and foreboding, as if guarding truths no human eyes could fully perceive. The abandoned research facility on Svalbard. Ice-clad peaks rose on the horizon, framing a facility whose sharp angles and metallic walls seemed almost unnatural against the Arctic expanse, and by the time the team had navigated the treacherous approach, the weight of isolation pressed upon them. Snow crunched beneath boots as the cold air pierced layers of insulated clothing. The structure loomed silently, its paint faded, and frost clung stubbornly to every surface. Though maps and satellite imagery had confirmed the coordinates, standing before the building in person revealed its forbidding scale. Even seasoned explorers felt a chill of uncertainty, a sense that this place had been waiting for decades in perfect frozen stillness. Snow and permafrost stretched endlessly, punctuated only by creaking glaciers and fissures that reflected light in disorienting patterns, creating both physical and psychological barriers to anyone attempting to traverse the region. Visibility changed abruptly as swirling snow clouds obscured landmarks, forcing careful navigation along narrow ridges. The ground shifted subtly underfoot, frozen and brittle, threatening treacherous collapses beneath heavy boots. Ice fractured in small, alarming cracks, amplifying every sound in the surrounding silence. The team moved with precision, relying on GPS and experience, yet the vast, inhospitable terrain seemed to stretch both time and perception, making each step toward the facility a deliberate act of courage against both nature and the unknown. Constructed during the late 20th century, the research facility had been used intermittently for climatology and geological studies, its operational history punctuated by sudden closures and long periods of abandonment that fed local speculation. Reports documented scientific experiments on permafrost, glacial movement, and atmospheric measurements, yet records grew sparse after government funding ended. Rumours circulated among Arctic pilots and locals of equipment malfunctions, unexplained power failures, and occasional auditory anomalies that accompanied the building's empty winters. Despite meticulous planning, the team realised that historical documentation offered only fragments of understanding. The combination of concrete history and legend created a tension, as though the facility's purpose and its mysteries were entangled beyond clear interpretation. The expedition meticulously unpacked instruments, heating systems and recording devices, aware that both the climate and the building's decay could turn even minor oversights into major hazards within minutes. Generators were checked, satellite communication verified, and environmental sensors calibrated. Each member documented equipment placement, ensuring redundancy in case of failures. The team noted frigid drafts and icy floors that required constant attention, aware that the Arctic environment could quickly compromise even the most durable technology. Every task was deliberate, a careful choreography to balance efficiency with safety. While the facility's structural integrity seemed sufficient for occupancy, subtle creaks and frozen joints reminded the team that they were intruding upon a space abandoned for decades. A faint, oscillating hum emerged from deep within the structure, imperceptible at first, then growing insistent, drawing the team's attention despite attempts to rationalize it as machinery settling or wind interacting with metal. Its origin could not be traced to any known source. The sound pulsed with an irregular rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. Researchers paused their measurements to observe, noting how the vibration appeared to affect metal surfaces and water condensate differently. Each step into the building amplified the resonance, heightening tension. While some speculated that the hum was the building adjusting to temperature fluctuations, no physical explanation accounted for its sudden, localized intensity. leaving the expedition questioning what exactly they were confronting. The investigators catalogued anomalies rigorously, noting shifts in temperature, erratic readings on electronic monitors, and inconsistent air pressure. Yet none of these irregularities could fully account for the sensations the team experienced. Thermometers fluctuated without apparent cause, while electromagnetic sensors recorded spikes that defied environmental norms. Team members attempted to correlate the data with documented weather patterns, but anomalies persisted even when conditions remained stable. Every deviation was meticulously logged, yet conventional analysis failed to provide a satisfying explanation. Each observation compounded the sense that the facility itself was an active participant in these events, as though the abandoned research complex held secrets embedded within its walls and circuits, imperceptible to casual examination. A subtle unease settled over the members, each step echoing through empty corridors and lab spaces, feeding a shared awareness that something about the facility resisted complete comprehension. Shadows appeared to stretch differently, angles shifted under flickering lights, and even the sound of footsteps seemed distorted. The team's conversations became quieter, punctuated by long pauses as attention was drawn to every small irregularity. Some reported faint sensations of pressure or movement nearby, though no one else was present. The psychological impact of isolation compounded with the facility's enigmas, making routine tasks feel charged with tension. Every corridor felt simultaneously familiar and alien, a labyrinth of frozen science and lingering mystery. Hallways revealed frozen equipment, papers stiffened by cold, and laboratory benches coated in dust, each object a frozen echo of human presence and industrial purpose long abandoned. Stacks of notebooks and binders hinted at unfinished experiments, while chemical samples remained sealed, their contents unaltered yet enigmatic. Broken glass and corroded tools suggested that decay had begun gradually, leaving traces that both informed and unsettled the team. Explorers carefully avoided disturbing fragile areas, aware that even minor movements could trigger structural hazards. The juxtaposition of careful human order and Arctic abandonment reinforced the sense of mystery, as though the facility itself had chosen to remain a silent witness to its own past, waiting for those daring enough to uncover it. Then, one instrument activated without cause, its lights flickering as if responding to an unseen hand, leaving the team scrambling for explanations while recording the phenomenon with mounting urgency. No power source or environmental trigger could account for the activation. Observers noted that readings shifted in patterns inconsistent with natural or mechanical causes. The team retraced steps, checking wiring and connections, but found nothing irregular. The anomaly left a lingering impression that the building systems were somehow semi-autonomous, capable of behavior independent of human oversight. Even the most skeptical member acknowledged the difficulty of reconciling the data with conventional understanding, and a subtle tension permeated every action in the following minutes. Attempts to reconcile the readings with environmental or mechanical factors only deepened the mystery, as each logical explanation failed to align with the precise behavior captured by their equipment. Patterns repeated with disquieting exactitude, yet no pattern matched known physics or engineering principles. The team cross-referenced historical reports, looking for clues, and found only anecdotal references to similar unexplained phenomena. Every failed hypothesis heightened the sense that the facility itself was a locus of enigma, resisting analysis. Time seemed distorted as investigation continued, and the team increasingly relied on observation and intuition to navigate spaces that were technically mapped, but experientially unpredictable. The facility's silence became oppressive, and archival records of past research only heightened the sense that the building itself was a repository of secrets beyond documentation or observation. Manuals, data logs, and personal notes hinted at experiments involving environmental monitoring and human adaptation, yet they left crucial gaps. Some passages were torn while others were left incomplete, as though researchers had fled mid-study. The interplay between documented history and current observation created a layered narrative, one where human presence intersected with enduring mystery. The team recorded every anomaly, but the cumulative effect of structural decay, environmental isolation, and inexplicable occurrences left the overarching enigma firmly intact. While the team readied to withdraw, every corridor and chamber seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if the structure itself conspired to delay their departure and retain its enigmas a little longer. Retracing steps, the explorers noticed subtle shifts in perception. Distances appeared distorted, corners seemed to extend, and shadows elongated in ways previously unseen. Equipment that had functioned normally earlier displayed intermittent errors. The Arctic twilight rendered familiar areas alien, reinforcing the sensation that leaving required negotiating not just distance, but an intangible influence embedded in the building. Each exit from a hallway was measured and deliberate, acknowledging that the facility's quiet authority might extend beyond mere architecture into the very minds of those who dared to enter. The abandoned research facility on Svalbard remained, frozen and unyielding, guarding enigmas that no visitor could ever fully unravel. The secret tunnels of Edinburgh Castle. The expedition began under the shadow of Edinburgh Castle's ancient walls, where a group of urban explorers sought passages long rumoured to exist beneath the fortress. While much of the castle is open to visitors, certain corridors and cellars are strictly off-limits, protected by centuries of stone and legend. The explorers carried only flashlights and cameras, descending through narrow stairwells that led deeper than the official blueprint suggested. From the outset, the tunnels felt almost alive, the cool damp air thick with the scent of limestone and history, as if the stone itself had been waiting for intruders. Edinburgh Castle has stood as a military stronghold since at least the 12th century, and over time it accumulated layers of construction that often obscured older structures. The tunnels the team followed were not recorded in any public maps, yet their masonry reflected the same medieval techniques seen elsewhere in the fortress. Faint carvings on the walls suggested previous human passage, perhaps soldiers or prisoners, but they were inconsistent and fragmentary, leaving the explorers with more questions than answers. The echo of their own footsteps amplified unnaturally, as though the tunnels absorbed sound only to return it distorted. The group discovered a chamber that seemed unusually intact, lined with stone benches and niches. One wall bore an archway sealed with rough blocks, partially covered in moss and dust. As they removed a few of the loose stones, the air inside grew colder, carrying a faint metallic tang. The explorers noted an inexplicable alignment of the chamber with the castle's main gate above, suggesting the tunnels had been constructed not haphazardly but with strategic intent. Some historians have speculated that these hidden corridors were escape routes or secret supply lines, but no records survive to confirm their original purpose. Light from the explorers' torches played across inscriptions scratched into the stone, difficult to interpret yet unmistakably human. A sequence of symbols appeared to mark distances or directions, though the meaning was unclear. Occasionally the walls seemed to shift under the beam, creating the illusion that the passages themselves were moving. One member of the team insisted he had passed a junction only to find it altered upon retracing his steps, as if the tunnels were not fixed in place. The sensation of being watched became palpable, though no human presence could be discerned. Deeper into the subterranean network, the temperature dropped sharply, forming condensation on the stone surfaces. Small pools of water collected in depressions, reflecting the torchlight with eerie clarity. As the explorers advanced, the walls narrowed, forcing them to move single file. Their radios failed intermittently, cutting off contact with the surface. An oppressive silence settled, broken only by distant dripping and the occasional scuff of boots on uneven stone. One explorer recorded a fleeting shadow at the periphery of his vision, but when he turned, nothing remained. The darkness seemed to swallow movement entirely. Historical accounts hint at secret detainment chambers beneath the castle, where prisoners of war were held in the 17th and 18th centuries. The explorers discovered what could have been one such room, its walls lined with crude iron rings embedded in the stone. The floor was pocked with indentations that suggested repeated weight or use. They found no human remains, yet the atmosphere carried an inexplicable sense of sorrow, as if echoes of those once confined still lingered. Some members reported a faint whispering, not coherent words, but a tonal vibration that resonated deep within the chest. Maps of the castle show no tunnels in this sector, yet the passages extended beyond the team's expectations, forming a labyrinth of twists and turns. At certain intersections, the corridors seemed to duplicate, creating the unsettling impression of circular paths. Attempts to mark progress were futile as tape and chalk marks disappeared or were displaced inexplicably by the next inspection. The explorers' internal compasses failed, and digital devices began malfunctioning, leaving them reliant solely on memory and instinct to navigate the maze. An area of the tunnels opened into a vaulted room, larger than any mapped chamber, its ceiling supported by massive stone arches. Here, the air carried a subtle vibration, almost like a hum, felt rather than heard. Torchlight revealed wall niches containing remnants of what appeared to be candles or torches long extinguished. One explorer reported a sudden dizziness while standing near the far corner, accompanied by a sensation of being pushed, though no one was nearby. The room felt alive with an unseen presence, and the team's movements became tentative, careful not to disturb what they could neither see nor understand. As the explorers pressed onward, they encountered a passage that seemed to vanish entirely, ending in a sheer stone wall that appeared newly formed compared to surrounding masonry. Attempts to bypass it revealed only narrow crawl spaces too tight for human passage, yet several reported glimpsing further corridors beyond the obstruction, visible in peripheral vision but impossible to approach. The walls occasionally exuded a faint moisture that glistened unnaturally under torchlight, and the sound of dripping echoed at impossible distances, defying spatial logic. Some chambers contained evidence of more recent human activity, though no one was officially permitted there. Footprints appeared faintly in dust, and one wall bore scratches consistent with modern tools. The explorers debated whether previous intruders had disturbed the site or if the castle itself somehow allowed these changes. Throughout the expedition, the tunnels seemed to shift subtly, passages widening or narrowing, junctions altering in ways that made orientation nearly impossible. Each discovery deepened the sense that the castle harboured secrets beyond human comprehension, hidden beneath centuries of stone. By the time the explorers emerged from the labyrinth, hours had passed, though the surface indicated far less. They recounted corridors that could not be located again, rooms that vanished when revisited, and sensations that defied natural explanation. Their photographs revealed faint distortions, shadows in angles that could not exist, and flashes of light that had no source. Historians remain puzzled, unable to reconcile these findings with known architecture, and local lore grows more insistent that Edinburgh Castle holds mysteries still protected by the very stones themselves. And somewhere beneath the ancient fortress, the tunnels continue to shift silently, waiting for the next intruder to discover what cannot be mapped. The dark pools of Plitvice. Beneath the fading light of late afternoon, a small team edged past the official barriers of Plitvice lakes, drawn to a lagoon forbidden to visitors, unaware that the water itself would soon seem alive with strange responses. Access to this section is restricted due to preservation concerns and treacherous terrain, yet curiosity led the explorers along narrow trails of limestone and moss. As they approached the lagoon, the tranquil surface belied the history of the park. Centuries of limestone sedimentation, travertine formations, and interconnected waterways that have long fascinated naturalists. Few have ventured here, and even fewer have returned with coherent accounts. Mist hovered above the terraces, curling along the limestone cliffs, as the explorers observed waters so clear they reflected every tree and shadow with unnatural precision. The lagoon was fed by underground streams and mineral-rich springs, creating pools of astonishing clarity. Sunlight filtered through tall pines along the shore, casting fractured patterns on the water, while clusters of aquatic plants swayed gently, responding to currents that seemed almost imperceptible. The team noted that the usual bird calls were muted here, replaced by a profound silence. Even the wind, when it blew, seemed dampened, absorbed by the dense forest and limestone walls surrounding the lagoon. Ripples formed without wind, and subtle distortions in depth made familiar rocks appear both closer and farther than possible, leaving the team questioning the lagoon's ordinary nature. Measurements of water depth revealed inconsistencies. Shallow areas appeared darker than deeper ones, creating the illusion of voids beneath the surface. The mineral composition, including high concentrations of calcium carbonate, contributed to the shimmering effect, but it could not fully explain the subtle movements of reflected images. As explorers extended their hands over the water, the surface seemed to warp around their fingers as though responding to touch. A sense of cautious wonder began to mingle with unease. The air grew heavier as they advanced, and the usual chorus of birds and insects faded to a hush, punctuated only by the echo of droplets falling from unseen sources. The forest around the lagoon is dense with conifers and deciduous trees, creating a canopy that traps humidity, yet the team felt something beyond the ordinary atmosphere. Occasionally a splash echoed from a corner of the lagoon where no fish could be seen, and the water glimmered in response as though anticipating movement. The explorers began to notice temperature shifts that seemed localized, small pockets of cold forming without apparent cause, enhancing the sensation that the lagoon itself was aware of their presence. One explorer knelt at the water's edge, and the lagoon seemed to respond, shimmering in patterns that no breeze or movement could account for, as if observing them in return. Small whirlpools formed briefly and vanished, leaving only faint concentric ripples. Light danced across submerged stones in unpredictable ways, fracturing familiar forms into geometries that made spatial orientation difficult. The team noted that even the reflection of their own bodies appeared distorted, elongating or shrinking in subtle ways. Cameras captured these anomalies inconsistently, sometimes registering patterns that the human eye had barely noticed, reinforcing the notion that the lagoon defied standard perception. Cameras captured reflections that twisted into impossible angles, and recordings picked up faint, low hums that dissolved when examined, frustrating attempts to document the anomaly. Digital devices frequently malfunctioned in the humid environment, and magnetic variations registered in small, inexplicable bursts. The explorers attempted to photograph the shimmering surface, but images often displayed ghostly distortions absent from reality. Even attempts to take precise depth readings produced inconsistent results, as if the lagoon actively resisted measurement. This inability to document added a weight of unreliability to their observations, enhancing the mystery while leaving them frustrated by their scientific limitations. Local guides had long whispered of the lagoon's strange behaviours, citing tales of fishermen and park workers who reported subtle distortions in sound and light, a history both fragmentary and unsettling. Though no official record exists of unnatural events here, folklore hints at pools that reflect more than the surface. Seasonal changes, moonlight angles, and atmospheric conditions are all said to reveal the lagoon's hidden patterns. Some guides spoke of visitors feeling inexplicably dizzy or overcome with vertigo near the forbidden section, descriptions that echoed the explorers' own early impressions. Such accounts lent historical weight to the contemporary phenomena without needing embellishment. Shadows flickered across submerged rocks in ways that defied the sun's trajectory, and the explorers sensed a rhythm to the water's surface that no natural current could explain. The interplay of light and depth produced optical illusions unlike any standard reflection. Stones beneath the water seemed to shift ever so slightly, creating fleeting patterns that suggested movement of something unseen. The explorers compared notes, realizing each had perceived the distortions differently, reinforcing the impression that the lagoon responded subjectively. Even subtle changes in posture or angle appeared to alter the reflections, as if the water had its own consciousness, selectively revealing and concealing features. Unease settled over the group. Some felt vertigo at the edges of the pools, while others experienced sudden chills, their own senses betraying them in the still, reflective environment. Conversations became muted, voices carrying strangely across the lagoon, sometimes echoing back altered in pitch or rhythm. Birds occasionally called, but the sounds were faint as if filtered through a layer of invisible glass. The explorers noticed that walking along the lagoon's edge felt disorienting. Distances were misjudged, and landmarks shifted subtly in perception. Each step heightened tension, as though the lagoon itself were testing the intruder's awareness. Scientific measurements offered clues: minerals in the water, its exceptional clarity, and the angles of light refraction. But none accounted for the subtle, almost sentient distortions that persisted across the lagoon. Calcium-rich travertine terraces naturally refract light, and varying depths can create unusual optical effects, yet the anomalies experienced by the team were both more fluid and consistent than any environmental explanation could encompass. Observations suggested an interaction between human perception and environmental factors, but the phenomenon remained largely inexplicable. Researchers familiar with Plitvice noted that the lagoon's chemistry was well documented, yet its behaviour in twilight seemed to escape even empirical categorization. As twilight deepened, the team witnessed the lagoon's final transformation, a momentary undulation across the water that formed shapes both familiar and impossible, leaving them silent and unsettled. Reflections fractured and reformed into fleeting patterns resembling distant figures or architectural forms, yet each dissolved when attention sharpened. The surface glimmered with shifting hues, from deep cobalt to translucent silver, while shadows stretched and receded without a clear source. Time itself seemed suspended, with minutes elongating and compressing in perception. The explorers could only watch, mesmerized and fearful, aware that what they saw might vanish entirely by dawn, leaving only memory and the faint ripple of water. When darkness finally claimed the forest, the black waters gleamed with secrets no eye could hold and no voice could name. The hidden monastery of Meteora. A small team moved quietly through the monastery's seldom used corridors, guided by lantern light and a growing sense of anticipation, unaware that the chamber ahead would challenge both their senses and their understanding of reality. Meteora, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, rises on towering sandstone pillars in central Greece, and its monasteries have stood largely untouched for centuries, accessible only by narrow stairways, rope ladders, and precarious bridges. The explorers' goal was a rarely visited chamber, long sealed to the public. Legend spoke of strange occurrences within, and as they approached, a quiet tension hung in the air, hinting that the expedition might test more than their courage. Narrow stone stairways wound upward, each step echoing softly against walls carved from centuries of rock, while the explorers felt a persistent weight in the still air, as though the monastery itself observed their passage. The staircases were hewn directly from sandstone, worn smooth by generations of monks ascending for prayer and meditation. Even as the explorers climbed cautiously, the acoustics amplified every footfall, producing an unsettling rhythm that seemed to follow them. Lantern light flickered across walls, revealing small niches and worn carvings. The isolation of the site, coupled with the precariousness of the climb, lent a heightened sense of vulnerability that set nerves on edge long before they reached the chamber. Frescoes and faded murals lined the halls, depicting solemn monks in prayer, their expressions frozen yet strangely alive, drawing the explorers' attention even as shadows deepened around them. The imagery, dating back to the 14th and 15th centuries, portrayed saints, apostles, and ascetics, each painted in vivid hues that had endured centuries of smoke, sun, and damp air. Some frescoes appeared to watch the explorers as they passed, their eyes catching lantern light in unexpected ways. Subtle layers of mineral residue from the sandstone walls created faint optical illusions, making figures seem to move when glanced at peripherally, an effect that both mesmerized and unnerved the team. Silence settled heavily between the walls, broken only by occasional gusts of wind or the creak of timber beams, yet every sound seemed amplified, carrying with it an unplaceable resonance that unsettled the senses. Meteora's monastic structures are renowned for their acoustics, designed to carry chanting across chambers and cliff faces. The explorers noticed how even a whisper bounced irregularly, sometimes returning in a distorted tone. Shadows from the flickering lanterns lengthened and contracted, and every minor sound, stone shifting underfoot, the flutter of a bat, seemed magnified. A sense of temporal distortion emerged. Minutes felt stretched, and the combination of silence and amplified sound created an almost hallucinatory environment. A faint murmur arose from a side chamber, indistinct yet undeniably present, prompting the team to pause and listen, as if the building itself had whispered a warning. No human figure could be seen, and the sound bore no identifiable source, a mixture of tones resembling distant prayer or whispered syllables. The explorers scanned the corridors, and the murmuring seemed to follow, shifting with them. Some considered natural explanations, wind funneled through cracks, echoes bouncing irregularly, or small wildlife. Yet the murmur's cadence and persistence felt deliberate, evading logical explanation and pulling attention toward the forbidden chamber ahead, a place marked for centuries as off-limits. Cameras and recording devices captured subtle irregularities, reflections that warped unexpectedly, and low tones that seemed absent to the ear, creating evidence both compelling and elusive. Attempts to photograph frescoes in the chamber produced images that showed shapes bending and shifting, not visible to the naked eye. Audio recorders picked up faint harmonic vibrations and low-frequency hums that were absent when replayed for analysis. Electrical anomalies, however minor, suggested interference with sensitive equipment. The explorers realized that documenting the chamber could never fully capture its strangeness. Every device failed to render the full experience, reinforcing the idea that the phenomenon interacted directly with human perception rather than existing entirely independently. Certain rooms remained sealed for centuries, used only for meditation and prayer, and the explorers sensed that the monastery's strict boundaries had a purpose that extended beyond mere ritual. Monastic rules historically limited access to these chambers to prevent disturbance of sacred rites and contemplation. The layout of these restricted areas was labyrinthine, designed to preserve spiritual focus and to maintain isolation from visitors. Walking these corridors, the explorers felt the careful, intentional architecture affecting their awareness, as if the walls themselves imposed boundaries on thought and perception. The interplay between physical space and spiritual intent created a tension that was both palpable and difficult to articulate. Venturing further inside, corridors twisted and angled in ways that seemed subtly deceptive, and each step brought a heightened sense of spatial uncertainty, as if the monastery expanded and contracted around them. Some hallways appeared longer than physically possible. Doorways seemed offset from expectation. Light from their lanterns produced optical illusions against uneven stone surfaces, creating phantom corridors and alcoves. Explorers occasionally found themselves retracing steps, convinced of progress that could not have occurred. The design of the monastery, historically meant to challenge and discipline, combined with natural erosion and uneven flooring, created a sensory puzzle that contributed to the mounting disorientation. A creeping vertigo began to affect some of the explorers, their perception of height and distance shifting unexpectedly, while the stone walls, silent and unmoving, seemed to distort in peripheral vision. Eyes could not trust the lines of corners, and limbs felt unsteady on surfaces that were otherwise solid. The quiet hum of the wind through cracks in the rock and occasional distant bird calls contributed to the sensation of spatial instability. Some members reported the fleeting impression of figures moving just beyond vision, though careful inspection revealed nothing. The mind, confronted with the unusual combination of isolation, echoes and visual distortions, amplified the strange stimuli into an almost tactile sense of presence. In the forbidden chamber's heart, a deep, resonant hum filled the space, vibrating through the explorers' bodies and creating a shared awareness that transcended sight and sound, demanding attention they could not ignore. The chamber, roughly rectangular with high vaulted ceilings, was acoustically isolated, causing low-frequency tones to linger in a manner that seemed unnatural. The explorers paused, feeling the vibration in their chest and limbs, a sensation simultaneously physical and psychological. None could identify a source, and the resonance fluctuated subtly, responding to movement or silence within the room. For several minutes they stood motionless, united by a phenomenon that defied explanation, yet demanded acknowledgement. With each step toward the sunlit exterior, the monastery's shadows lingered unnaturally, stretching across walls and corridors long after the explorers had moved past, leaving a sense that the space itself retained memory. Every step back felt heavier, the earlier sensations echoing in the mind. The natural light from outside contrasted sharply with the dim, humming interiors, yet even the sunlit halls seemed tainted by the chamber's lingering presence. Observers would later note that although nothing tangible had been harmed or altered, every member carried a lasting impression, a sense of participation in something beyond ordinary perception and beyond their ability to document fully. Even as sunlight touched the stone pinnacles again, the echoes of that hidden chamber lingered in the mind, inaudible yet impossible to forget. The confined chambers of Poveglia Island. The explorers stepped cautiously onto Poveglia Island, the abandoned asylum looming ahead, aware that venturing into its sealed chambers could provoke sensations that defied explanation. Situated between the Venetian lagoon and the mainland near Venice, Italy, the island had served as a quarantine station for plague victims, and later as a mental hospital with strict restrictions on access. Weathered stone and overgrown pathways gave the place an air of abandonment yet suggested a lingering presence. As the team approached the main building, the wind carried faint echoes of the past. Shouts, cries and footsteps that may have once belonged to the confined patients or perhaps only to the imagination. Crumbling walls and rusted gates framed the shoreline, and every step on the uneven ground seemed to echo across the empty expanse, emphasizing the isolation that had enveloped the island for decades. Trees twisted unnaturally against the crumbling architecture, and patches of fog clung low to the ground, obscuring what lay ahead. The explorers noted the chill in the damp air and the faint smell of mildew mixed with salt from the surrounding lagoon. Each building appeared to lean slightly, distorted by time and neglect, yet perfectly functional in memory, suggesting the heavy presence of human activity long since departed, but still etched into the atmosphere. Inside the asylum, narrow hallways stretched ahead, lined with peeling paint, rotting wood, and scattered debris, creating a maze that immediately heightened both caution and unease. Rusted beds, broken wheelchairs, and fragments of old medical equipment littered the corridors, testifying to decades of use and neglect. Lanterns cast long, shifting shadows across walls, transforming mundane objects into phantom forms. The explorers moved carefully, aware that each step could shift the way space appeared, and yet some corners seemed unnaturally dark, as if the air itself absorbed light. Every turn produced a sense of familiarity paired with dislocation, a hallucinatory quality that made them second-guess the layout. Silence pressed heavily against the explorers' ears, punctuated only by the faint drip of water and the distant groan of collapsing structures, each sound magnified in the still, oppressive air. Footfalls echoed unpredictably. A step in one hallway seemed to reverberate from behind or above. Occasional drafts whispered through gaps in boarded windows, carrying with them faint, unidentifiable odours. Every minor noise produced an exaggerated sense of scale and immediacy, drawing attention to the smallest details. The team became hyper-aware of the asylum's acoustics, noticing the way wind, settling stone or shifting debris could imitate voices, footsteps, or even whispers, amplifying the tension in a space already heavy with history. A sudden chill swept through a corridor, and the team noticed shadows shifting against the walls, fleeting and impossible to track, evoking a subtle but undeniable tension. One explorer thought they glimpsed a figure at the end of a hallway, only to find nothing upon closer inspection. Temperature dropped sharply in patches, producing goosebumps and a faint pressure on the chest. Despite the apparent absence of any living presence, the sensory anomalies felt directed, as if the space itself responded to their intrusion. Every movement was measured, deliberate, as though a subtle force guided their path, testing attention, courage, and perhaps the limits of perception itself. Cameras and audio equipment faltered inexplicably, capturing distortions that seemed to ripple through space, frustrating every attempt to document the strange occurrences with certainty. Photographs of peeling walls sometimes showed shapes that did not exist when viewed in person, and recordings contained low-frequency vibrations or static bursts that had no identifiable source. Thermometers and sensors registered sudden spikes and drops in temperature, defying known environmental patterns. The explorers attempted to reconcile their observations with empirical evidence, yet every device failed to capture the full scope of the experience, reinforcing the sense that the phenomena were both environmental and perceptual, interacting directly with human consciousness. The asylum's history lingered palpably in every room, from its use as a quarantine station to the confinement of patients, and the explorers could feel that decades of human suffering had left a heavy imprint on the environment. Records indicate that thousands passed through Poveglia's gates, many never leaving, subjected to harsh treatment and isolation. The architecture itself, narrow cells, barred windows and locked treatment rooms, was designed for confinement, and this physical oppression seemed to resonate through the air. As the team moved from one chamber to the next, the weight of past trauma created an almost tactile atmosphere, shaping perception and lending credibility to the anomalies they encountered. Strange phenomena escalated while the team moved deeper, with unexplained drafts, sudden temperature drops, and shadows that appeared to stretch and recoil, testing both focus and courage. Footsteps seemed to echo behind them, though no one had followed. Walls appeared to expand and contract in subtle ways, and corners that had seemed familiar moments before suddenly felt alien. The combination of decaying architecture, poor lighting, and heightened sensory awareness produced a creeping sense of disorientation. Explorers reported brief, unsteady flashes in vision, like shapes moving just out of focus, leaving them questioning the reliability of their own senses. Unease settled into a physical weight, and some explorers felt disoriented and hyper-aware, perceiving subtle changes in the structure that may or may not have existed. One moment, a hallway felt impossibly long. The next, rooms appeared smaller than before. Nerves frayed under the constant pressure of silence and faint environmental anomalies. Heartbeats quickened in response to imagined sounds, and every whisper of wind or shifting of debris seemed amplified into something purposeful. Even the most rational members of the team struggled to separate history and architecture from the unsettling impressions pressing upon them from all sides. In the heart of a sealed chamber, a low, resonant vibration filled the air, felt collectively by every member of the team, demanding attention in a way that transcended sight and sound. The room, formerly used for patient isolation, reverberated with a hum that could not be traced to machinery, wind, or structural movement. Explorers felt it in their bones, a pulsing sensation that seemed to align with their own heartbeats. For several tense minutes, the team stood in shared awareness of this anomaly, unable to identify its source, but acutely conscious of its impact, leaving a profound impression that lingered long after the vibration ceased. Retracing their steps toward the exit, the explorers felt the asylum's presence linger behind them, an invisible tension woven into walls, floors, and air, defying both understanding and escape. Every hallway echoed with memories of previous occupants, real or imagined, and the outside world seemed distant and unreachable. The wind through broken windows carried faint, inexplicable sounds, and the decay of the building itself appeared almost purposeful, as if preserving both space and experience. Though daylight eventually illuminated the crumbling facade, the psychological imprint of the chambers remained, a quiet, inescapable reminder of the intersection of history, environment, and perception. Even after the last footsteps faded from the cracked floors, the chambers seemed to pulse with a presence that no door or wall could contain. The enclosed fortress of Fort Bhangarh. Heat shimmered across the Rajasthan plain as the team approached Fort Bhangarh, the centuries-old walls rising abruptly from sun-scorched earth, sharp against a cloudless sky. Their arrival was met with a stillness that seemed to press down, broken only by the whisper of wind over jagged rocks. The explorers were conscious of local warnings. Entry to the fort was officially prohibited, not merely for its dilapidated state, but also because legends spoke of misfortune and unexplained agitation affecting those who lingered too long. As they stepped closer, a subtle unease pricked at their senses, a tension that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. Sand crunched underfoot as jagged cliffs and sparse vegetation framed the fort, the surrounding desert amplifying its isolation. Every movement carried a heightened awareness of exposure, the sun's intensity, the dry wind whipping heat against the skin, and the stark contrast between the pale sand and the dark fort walls. Rocks jutted unevenly, making each step uncertain, and the explorers found themselves scanning the horizon for more than landmarks. It was as if the land itself enforced caution, a reminder that the fort did not exist in isolation, but in a harsh, unyielding environment. Crossing the main gate, they felt the heat radiate off the stones, almost tactile, as if the fort itself exhaled the day's accumulated warmth. Open courtyards stretched outward, angular and uneven, their perceptions subtly distorted under the relentless sun. Each wall seemed slightly out of place, the angles off by fractions that made measurement difficult and left the mind straining for consistency. Despite their awareness of the fort's layout from maps and satellite imagery, reality seemed to shift with every step, as though the structure was resisting understanding. Shadows flickered across the inner walls as sunlight struck broken battlements, bending perception and creating illusions where none should exist. A courtyard appeared longer in one moment, shorter the next. A stairwell seemed to slope differently depending on the sun's angle. Small changes in wind stirred the dust, which caught the light in ways that suggested movement where there was none. Each explorer felt the subtle tug of imbalance, the dissonance between what they expected to see and what was presented, and a quiet anxiety began to ripple through the group. A sudden dizziness swept over one of the team, sharp and disorienting, while a wave of irritability seemed to ripple through others. Head throbs came without warning, and brief moments of nausea struck, leaving them wondering whether it was the heat, exertion, or something less explainable. Conversations grew clipped as focus faltered, and minor disagreements over direction surfaced rapidly. Even the most composed members were aware that environmental stress could exaggerate perception, yet the speed and intensity of these reactions suggested that the fort and its surroundings were exerting a subtle, pervasive influence. Climbing a crumbling tower, the explorers noted uneven stones, precarious ledges, and sections partially collapsed from centuries of neglect. From above, the courtyard below stretched in a pattern that seemed to shift with each angle of vision. Heat waves rose from stone and sand alike, distorting space and making the descent appear more treacherous than it likely was. Wind gusts occasionally struck unexpectedly, throwing off balance and heightening awareness of the fort's architecture as something more than mere ruins, a space actively interacting with those who entered. The fort's history pressed upon them as tangibly as the sun. Built during the 17th and 18th centuries, it was long abandoned after repeated warnings from local authorities, partly for structural danger and partly due to legends of misfortune. Tales persisted of soldiers, travellers, and even locals who reported sudden bouts of disorientation, unprovoked anger and ill health after prolonged exposure. While the explorers were careful to separate folklore from fact, the combination of heat, exposure, and physical strain seemed to validate a shared uneasy truth. Fort Bhangarh exacted a toll on anyone who lingered too long. Without warning, a gust of wind swept across the inner courtyard, stirring sand into arcs of shimmering dust and producing a hiss that sounded almost like a whispered warning. The explorers stumbled slightly, each footstep now accompanied by the crunch of shifting grains that masked their own movements. The wind changed temperature, cold against their faces after the unrelenting heat of the stones, leaving a transient sense of imbalance. Perception shifted again. Walls and battlements appeared to lean slightly, and the courtyard seemed larger than memory suggested. Tension escalated while the team exchanged wary glances. Minor disagreements flared briefly, amplified by fatigue, dehydration, and the unnatural effects of sunlight and shadow. Even the quietest members found themselves snapping or overreacting to trivial missteps. The fort and the desert seemed to have conspired to influence not only their bodies, but also the social atmosphere, creating subtle but undeniable unease. Every exploration decision carried weight, not simply for safety but for maintaining composure in a space that seemed to amplify human vulnerability. At the fort's central terrace, the climactic event unfolded. A collective disorientation struck suddenly. Vision blurred, steps faltered, and shadows elongated in ways that defied logic. The explorers experienced a simultaneous sense of elevation and compression, as if the space itself was folding around them. Awareness of being observed intensified, not through any visible presence, but through the unshakable impression that the fort and desert were monitoring every movement. The combination of heat, wind, spatial distortion, and subtle environmental anomalies created a moment of shared, undeniable tension. Retracing their steps toward the gate, the explorers remained alert, their pace deliberate, yet the oppressive heat and the fort's irregular shadows continued to press upon them. Their bodies recovered slowly, but the mind retained an indelible impression of the fort's unusual influence. Every glance at walls, battlements, or open courtyards evoked the previous moments of disorientation, reminding them that perception had been tested in ways both physical and psychological. The desert landscape itself seemed to fold around the fort, emphasizing its isolation and reinforcing the weight of every step taken. The memory of the fort's scorching walls and shifting shadows clung to them, as if the desert itself had marked their passage. The lost mines of Cerro Rico. A damp metallic scent hung in the air as the entrance to Cerro Rico yawned before them, its stone walls etched with centuries of labour and shadowed by a darkness that seemed to pulse with hidden presence. The team hesitated at the threshold, aware that these forbidden shafts had claimed innumerable lives since the Spanish first exploited the mountain's silver. Despite modern equipment and careful preparation, an instinctive unease tugged at their attention, as if the mine itself assessed their worthiness to enter. As their lamps flickered against jagged walls, the faintest glimmer of movement in the shadows suggested that the mine held secrets beyond human reckoning. Narrow ladders and carved stone steps disappeared into pitch, each rung groaning under pressure, and the explorers felt the verticality press upon them as though the mountain itself weighed heavily on their shoulders. Dust rose with every careful footfall, and loose rock crunched in ways that made orientation uncertain. Even familiar landmarks vanished behind corners and twists, leaving them dependent on memory, torches and maps that could not account for centuries of collapse and change. Every step demanded attention, and each sound seemed magnified in the enveloping darkness. Dripping water echoed from unseen chambers, irregular and unpredictable, while the faint metallic tang of ore filled the air, clinging to the skin and stirring a subtle anxiety in each breath. The rhythm of droplets created an eerie cadence, at once natural and alien, blending with faint scuffing noises and the low hum of subterranean wind. Sensory perception strained under the weight of unfamiliar surroundings. What was natural sound, what was imagination, and what might hint at phenomena beyond explanation remained impossible to discern. Faint glimmers of reflected light caught on veins of silver and other minerals, flickering against walls that otherwise should have remained still. Shadows stretched and shrank unpredictably, bending around corners or receding into unlit passages. The explorers noticed them in peripheral vision first, an impression that something moved just beyond comprehension. Whenever they turned, the shadows seemed inert, yet the sense of shifting space persisted. Even seasoned professionals found their perceptions tested by the irregular geometry and the play of light in the mine's recesses. Tunnels constricted abruptly, forcing crouched passage over uneven floors and around jagged stone protrusions. Every inhale carried dust thick enough to coat the skin, scratch throats, and irritate lungs, amplifying awareness of each heartbeat and movement. Physical strain compounded mental tension, and fatigue crept in rapidly, not just from exertion but from the relentless need to monitor footing, light and sound simultaneously. The mind demanded vigilance, punishing both carelessness and inattention in subtle yet insistent ways. The weight of history pressed in alongside the stone. Spanish colonial miners had risked and often lost their lives extracting silver from Cerro Rico, labouring in near darkness with crude tools, exposed to toxic minerals and collapsing tunnels. Mortality was not abstract here. Skeletal remains and rusted tools served as reminders that the mountain bore witness to centuries of suffering. The shadows of these labours seemed to permeate the shafts, and the explorers found themselves listening for echoes that might never have been created by living footsteps at all. In deeper galleries, the walls seemed to close in, narrowing corridors and shaft intersections until movement required deliberate care. Echoes multiplied unpredictably, bouncing from angle to angle, producing sounds that could not be traced. Occasionally, peripheral vision caught movements that vanished when directly observed, subtle disturbances that made the brain question the stability of space itself. The combination of darkness, history, and confined architecture created a sensory trap, challenging the explorers to separate perception from misperception. Pressure in the chest and a subtle vertigo crept over the team members, blending with the disorientation produced by irregular surfaces, flickering light and echoing sound. Brief moments of panic flared, tempered only by conscious control, as the mind struggled to reconcile immediate physical stress with the oppressive atmosphere of the mine. Every step required negotiation between caution and curiosity, as the labyrinthine tunnels demanded trust in memory and in one another. Crumbling platforms and narrowing shafts amplified risk further. Wood supports were aged and brittle. Stone ledges jutted at awkward angles. Choices about where to step or how to maneuver were weighed against both probability of injury and psychological strain. Even small errors in judgment seemed magnified under these conditions, turning a misstep into a potential catastrophe. The explorers were acutely aware that Cerro Rico was not merely a relic to observe, but an environment that actively tested those who entered. A sudden chorus of unexplainable sounds erupted in one of the deeper chambers, distant scraping that could not be traced, faint whispers that dissipated when approached, and a flicker of light along the walls that seemed to defy their movements. The team froze, sharing a collective disorientation, each member's perception slightly askew, and a muted tension filled the air. It was neither fully terrifying nor entirely comprehensible. Instead, it pressed against reason, leaving a residue of unease that lingered even as they pressed onward. Emerging into the open air, the oppressive density of stone, dust and shadow left a palpable impression. The mind retained the tactile memory of narrow passages, uneven steps, and the subtle weight of centuries embedded in the walls. The daylight offered relief but could not erase the mental trace of the mind's influence. Every memory of shifting shadows, flickering light, and untraceable sounds created an indelible imprint, ensuring that Cerro Rico had left its mark far beyond the physical confines of the shafts. The faint glimmer of unseen figures and the echo of distant footsteps lingered in their minds, long after the shafts of Cerro Rico had swallowed their presence. The off-limits plateau of Area 51. Signals flickered across monitors that were supposed to remain stable, and in the sterile hush of the Forbidden Zone, every static burst felt like a message from something unseen, hinting at the inexplicable events the expedition was about to encounter. Even with maps, prior reconnaissance and careful planning, the anomaly presented an immediate sense of uncertainty. Equipment that had functioned perfectly during preparation began registering inconsistent data, and the constant hum of electronics seemed to carry an intelligence of its own. Each member of the expedition became hyper-aware of their surroundings, acutely conscious that the plateau's secrecy was more than symbolic. It had tangible effects. Radios emitted low, irregular hums that seemed to resonate with the observer's own pulse, while digital instruments reported readings that contradicted one another without explanation. Attempts to recalibrate devices only intensified the discrepancies, and the interplay of signals and silence created a tension that was almost audible in its intensity. Every beep, static burst, or sudden spike in data drew attention, demanding interpretation while resisting it. The technology that should have offered certainty instead became a medium for doubt, and the observers felt the fragile boundary between reality and perception begin to blur. Shadows fell strangely against metallic structures and perimeter fencing, stretching in impossible directions and creating fleeting impressions of movement that vanished when confronted. A reflection on a panel might appear for a moment as a figure, only to dissolve the instant it was examined directly. Peripheral vision constantly detected motion, yet direct observation revealed only static surfaces. The mind strained to distinguish anomaly from imagination, and each distortion amplified the sense that the plateau was not a passive environment, but an entity that interacted with perception itself. The history of Area 51 weighed on the expedition silently. Decades of classified aircraft testing, reports of mysterious aerial phenomena, and restricted access that ensured rumour and fact intertwined indistinguishably. The observers carried with them the weight of decades of secrecy, aware that the plateau had been the stage for projects such as U2 and A12 testing, while unofficial accounts hinted at aerial events that defied conventional explanation. This historical backdrop amplified the psychological tension, as every flicker or anomaly could be interpreted as a continuation of the site's legacy of concealment and intrigue. As they advanced towards heavily secured zones, even familiar equipment faltered, cameras failed, compasses wavered, and electronic locks responded unpredictably, introducing an unsettling uncertainty into every decision. Every attempt to verify position or observation brought conflicting information, and familiar instruments suddenly felt alien. The plateau's boundaries seemed less defined by fences and signs than by the anomalies themselves, creating a mental map that shifted with each reading and observation. It became impossible to rely on instinct or training alone. Faint, rhythmic pulses of light flickered across distant hangars, inconsistent with known sources, leaving observers to debate whether the phenomenon was atmospheric, technological, or beyond comprehension. The lights appeared deliberate, moving in ways that contradicted the plateau's contours, yet they left no evidence of a physical source. Observers noted a subtle pattern in the intervals, as if some hidden mechanism was communicating, though its meaning remained indecipherable. The mind instinctively searched for rational explanations, but the signals persisted, defying straightforward interpretation. Mental fatigue and heightened awareness combined to warp perception. Ordinary noises sounded deliberate, and the sterile environment seemed to thrum with a quiet intelligence. Each footstep, each electronic blip, and even the faint echo of a distant machine carried significance beyond understanding. The plateau imposed a psychological weight that pressed equally on all senses, eroding confidence and magnifying uncertainty. Awareness became a fragile tool prone to misinterpretation, and the boundary between external stimulus and internal projection began to dissolve. Digital maps displayed contradictory data, altimeters wavered, and even the GPS units seemed reluctant to report their actual position, reinforcing a sense that the plateau resisted being fully understood. Attempts to triangulate location only revealed greater inconsistencies, as if the very geography had been deliberately obfuscated. Observers had to rely on intuition alongside instruments, a combination that felt precarious in the face of repeated anomalies. The plateau, though physically expansive, functioned almost as a puzzle designed to test perception and resolve. A sudden interference in communications produced a synchronized pattern of beeps and static across every device, coinciding with an unidentifiable light that moved with deliberate unpredictability along the perimeter. The observers froze, unsure whether the phenomenon was controlled, natural, or entirely beyond comprehension. The light did not follow conventional physics. It darted, paused, and then vanished in ways inconsistent with known technology. The anomaly left a shared impression of awareness, as though the plateau itself had registered their presence and responded in kind. Retreat from the central plateau brought no relief. Each flicker of light and hum of electronics seemed to follow, as though the zone's presence extended beyond its physical boundaries. Every attempt to escape the strange effects only reinforced their influence, and the plateau's anomalies persisted in subtle, disorienting ways. Observers became conscious not only of the events themselves, but of the tension and unease these events had etched into memory, leaving them hyper-aware of even the smallest irregularities during their withdrawal. Even hours later, when instruments functioned normally and silence returned, the memory of anomalies and inexplicable phenomena remained vivid, embedding themselves into awareness with unsettling persistence. Observers found themselves questioning what had been real, what had been misperceived, and what might have been intentionally obscured. The plateau left no physical scars, yet it imposed psychological marks that lingered, defying any attempt to rationalize them entirely. Memory and perception had become intertwined with the unexplained, producing a tension that endured far beyond the boundaries of the restricted zone. Every malfunction, every fleeting glimmer suggested that the plateau's secrets were far from dormant, leaving them to wonder what had truly remained unseen. The restricted ruins of Tikal. A low, almost imperceptible pressure hung in the air the moment they crossed the threshold of the sealed chamber, as if the stones themselves were aware of the intrusion. The air was thick with the scent of earth and aged limestone, and the faint echoes of distant footsteps seemed amplified in ways that defied physical explanation. Every movement felt deliberate and observed, and the explorers became immediately conscious that the chamber resisted ordinary perception. The sense of entering a space untouched for decades, or perhaps centuries, added a weight to their steps, and each glance revealed surfaces that seemed to shift subtly under scrutiny. Layers of history pressed outward from every carved surface, each glyph and relief whispering of Tikal's prominence in a civilization that thrived centuries before. The Mayan inscriptions, painstakingly preserved despite time and weather, hinted at rituals and ceremonies long lost to memory. Some symbols were immediately intelligible to scholars, while others carried ambiguities that resisted translation, adding to the mounting tension. The team felt both awe and unease, understanding that they were in a place meant to be revered and perhaps deliberately concealed from prying eyes. Tight passageways and uneven terraces forced cautious steps, reminding the observers that these sections had long been off-limits to visitors and scholars alike. The worn stone offered little footing, and occasional crumbled surfaces threatened small slips. It became clear that the ruins were designed with both function and mystery in mind. Passages funneled attention, altered sightlines, and created a sense of disorientation that seemed intentional. Even minor missteps produced echoes that filled the chambers in unexpected ways, reinforcing a subtle psychological tension. Figures etched into limestone demanded attention, their forms subtly warped in ways that seemed to respond to observation rather than remain static. Human and animal shapes intertwined with abstract patterns, producing a visual effect that unsettled the mind after prolonged viewing. Shadows cast by uneven surfaces seemed to flicker with movement, provoking a sensation that the carvings themselves were shifting imperceptibly. This optical ambiguity kept the explorers on edge, unable to fully distinguish between the tangible stone and the illusions created by their own perception. Sounds reverberated unpredictably through the interior, making footsteps, murmurs, and the faint scraping of stone impossible to locate, confusing the senses. Conversations were abruptly interrupted by echoes that seemed to originate from multiple directions at once. The chamber amplified whispers and created phantom noises that suggested presence even when no one else was near. Every attempt to orient themselves produced conflicting auditory cues, heightening a creeping unease that gnawed at rationality. A creeping sense of vertigo and pressure affected each member of the group, as if the chamber's very geometry interfered with balance and awareness. Stairways appeared longer than measured, and descending passages seemed to extend beyond their physical dimensions. Some observers reported a momentary sensation of being pulled towards walls or corners, and brief lapses in coordination occurred without warning. The psychological strain became tangible. The ruins seemed to manipulate not just perception but also the body's instinctive responses. Hidden corridors revealed their presence only fleetingly, narrow shafts and sudden descents breaking conventional expectations of the ruins' layout. Explorers occasionally glimpsed openings just beyond the edge of vision, but approaching them often revealed only dead ends or partially collapsed sections. The unpredictable architecture created a sense of instability, suggesting that the site had been deliberately configured to challenge comprehension. Every twist and turn amplified the feeling of walking through a living puzzle, one that could never be fully solved. At the heart of the altar room, shadows shifted independently of any light source, producing a shared illusion that disoriented and unsettled the observers simultaneously. The carvings surrounding the altar seemed to breathe subtly, and ambient light reflected in unexpected ways, creating flickers and distortions that defied explanation. Even those trained in archaeology and optics found themselves questioning their own senses. The chamber appeared to communicate through visual cues, a silent language that neither maps nor photographs could capture. Documentation proved unreliable. Photographs captured only empty stone, and sketches failed to reproduce the ephemeral distortions that had been unmistakably present. Written notes attempted to describe the effects but quickly grew repetitive and unsatisfactory, as if the very act of recording the phenomena altered their perception. Attempts to triangulate or measure dimensions produced inconsistent results, leaving observers to rely more on memory and intuition than on empirical data. The ruins maintained their secrets in ways that resisted standard methods of understanding. Retracing their path to the open plaza did little to ease the sensation that the chamber had left a residual influence on perception and memory. The overgrown terraces and sunlight-dappled clearings could not dispel the lingering impressions of warped space, flickering shadows, and incomprehensible carvings. Even ordinary environmental cues felt altered, and every familiar landmark was subtly reframed through the prism of the experience. The sense of having been touched by something beyond mere history remained palpable, embedding itself in cognition and emotion alike. Thoughts of the ruins lingered persistently, the carvings and hidden spaces embedding themselves in consciousness in ways that resisted rational explanation. Team members found their reflections and sketches returning to the anomalies they had observed, mentally reconstructing the shapes and shadows despite the lack of photographic evidence. Discussions alternated between academic curiosity and tentative fear, as each person grappled with the realization that the site's design may have been intended to produce such reactions, to protect knowledge from intrusion. The ruins seemed to withhold their meaning deliberately, leaving them to question what truths had been concealed for centuries beneath stone and shadow. The hidden dungeons of Chateau de Brissac. The heavy wooden door groaned under their touch, and the first steps into the dungeons were met with a chill that seemed to seep into bone and mind alike. The air was dense, carrying an almost tangible weight that pressed against their senses, and the faint flicker of lantern light revealed the contours of walls, blackened by centuries of dampness. Each echo of movement bounced unpredictably, creating the impression that the shadows themselves were alive and observing. The explorers felt a subtle disorientation, as though the dungeons had their own rhythm and would not permit ordinary comprehension, setting the stage for the unsettling experiences to come. Centuries of confinement and whispered tales seemed to cling to the walls, each stone telling fragments of the chateau's long, often violent history. Château de Brissac, towering above the Loire Valley, had been built in the 15th century, its reputation punctuated by noble intrigues, executions, and a labyrinthine series of dungeons designed to contain both prisoners and secrets. The damp, uneven floors held imprints of countless footsteps, and echoes of past suffering seemed to linger in corners where the light failed to reach. Even historians approached the lower levels cautiously, aware that the physical structure was intertwined with centuries of human fear and superstition. Narrow spiral staircases forced careful footing, and the explorers felt their awareness sharpen as the light dimmed and shadows gathered around the winding descent. The spiral's central shaft seemed to twist in ways that distorted depth perception, and the low stone ceilings pressed against peripheral vision, creating a heightened sense of intimacy with the past. Lantern beams danced along the walls, revealing rough-hewn niches and alcoves where prisoners had likely been confined. Every creak of the stairs seemed amplified, merging with distant, unexplained echoes that made it difficult to distinguish between human action and architectural acoustics. Damp air carried faint odours of moss and iron, while subtle movements in peripheral vision suggested shapes that vanished when directly observed. The explorers began to notice patterns in the shadows, flickers that appeared in repeated corners, brief forms that seemed to shift when attention focused on them. A faint, almost imperceptible draft caused the lantern flames to flicker unpredictably, adding to the sense that the dungeons themselves were responding to their presence. Each step forward deepened the psychological tension as the boundary between objective observation and subjective impression became increasingly blurred. Stone corridors twisted unpredictably, ceilings lowered unexpectedly, and echoes of footsteps were warped into sounds that appeared to come from multiple directions at once. Hallways that seemed straight-ended abruptly or curved into hidden alcoves, while doors and barred cells appeared where none had been anticipated. The reverberations distorted ordinary sounds, making a single movement seem multiplied and spatially dislocated. The explorers became aware that the structure's design could manipulate both vision and hearing, producing effects that challenged comprehension and heightened the unease of being in a place long designed to contain both people and mysteries. A sense of vertigo took hold, accompanied by brief moments where distances and angles seemed impossible, challenging both perception and balance. Some chambers felt far larger than the dimensions suggested, while others compressed unnaturally, forcing the explorers to negotiate spatial anomalies that resisted straightforward measurement. The irregularity of floors and walls, combined with minimal lighting, created subtle disorientation. Even simple tasks such as taking a step or mapping the space demanded extraordinary attention, as the dungeons seemed to demand both reverence and wariness from any who entered. Rusted iron bars and forgotten chains hinted at centuries of imprisonment, their presence magnified by unexplained cold pockets and shadows that lingered too long. Niches along the walls contained remnants of shackles and anchors, relics of punishment whose history could be traced through local records. The explorers found themselves instinctively recoiling from these spaces, not purely from fear of decay or darkness, but from an unexplainable psychological pull suggesting the echoes of past suffering were present still. Every glance at these objects seemed to lengthen shadows and distort the surrounding air, creating a subtle impression of movement where none existed. In the deepest chamber, a faint movement flickered across multiple corners simultaneously, leaving the team questioning whether it was light, shadow, or something else entirely. The effect was so fleeting and delicate that describing it in words proved inadequate. It was neither figure nor apparition, but rather an impression of synchronized motion that defied logic. Lantern beams quivered as though responding to it, and a collective unease settled over the group, suggesting that their senses were no longer entirely their own. The chamber's architecture appeared to amplify both perception and uncertainty, producing a strange resonance that seemed to exist between reality and imagination. Attempts to photograph the phenomenon captured only static, and sketching the space failed to reproduce the distortions that had been unmistakably present to the eyes. The explorers became increasingly aware of the limitations of conventional documentation. Cameras and paper could not record the ephemeral effects that had imprinted themselves on perception. Even verbal descriptions fell short, as language struggled to convey the subtle interplay of light, shadow, and psychological tension that defined the experience. The dungeon's mysteries remained inaccessible to traditional methods, demanding direct presence and careful, contemplative observation to be fully apprehended. As they ascended toward the brighter corridors above, the oppressive sensations persisted, clinging to memory as though the dungeons had imprinted themselves on perception. Each step toward open air was accompanied by a growing awareness of residual unease. The contrast between light and shadow heightened the lingering impressions of shifting forms and distorted echoes. Though physically removed from the spaces, the explorers remained mentally tethered, haunted by the faint suggestions of movement and the sense that the dungeons were still watching, still alive in subtle ways. Later reflections revealed that even recounting the experience altered its details, as if the space continued to manipulate memory long after the explorers had left. Recollections of shadows, cold pockets, and architectural anomalies shifted with each retelling, leaving the team uncertain of what had been seen, felt, or imagined. The dungeon's influence lingered in consciousness, a quiet insistence that some aspects of the chateau's history and design were meant to remain partially unknowable. The explorers recognised that the true nature of the experience lay not in overt spectacle, but in the subtle, persistent way the dungeons reshaped perception and memory. The dungeons seemed to breathe in silence, preserving secrets that no light could fully illuminate and no voice could entirely reveal.